Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And before I begin, I would like to point out, or I would like to remind everybody that we will not be taking anybody apart from our participants, our presenters, and the speakers on live. But if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please feel free to comment below in the Q&A section, and I'll try and make sure that they're addressed by the relevant authority. And with that, I would like to welcome Professor Hassan Iqbal, Mr. Waqasul Hassan, and Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, Chairperson, Karandaaz Pakistan. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. My name is Hassan Saeed and I will be your host for today. I welcome you all to this webinar to mark the launch of the Karandaaz report on the state of business taxation, challenges for SMEs in Pakistan. Today's webinar has been organized by Karandaaz Pakistan. It is a not-for-profit company under the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. I would also like to encourage everybody to share their thoughts on today's webinar by using the following hashtags: #KRN hashtag SME, and hashtag taxation on social media. We'll begin the proceedings with welcome remarks by Mr. Waqasul Hassan, CEO Karandaaz, welcoming remarks by Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, Chairperson Karandaaz, followed by a keynote address by Professor Hassan Iqbal, Federal Minister for Planning, Development and Special Initiatives, Planning Commission of Pakistan. During the course of this webinar, we'll have a presentation on the findings of the report, and we'll also have two panel discussions focusing on the challenges faced by SMEs in complying with tax policies and policy measures to strengthen SME tax collection. Lastly, we'll have remarks by Member Policy FPR Afaq Ahmed Qureshi Sahab, and we'll be concluding the webinar with closing remarks by Dr. Najeeb Mehman, who's the Chief Commissioner of Karachi, Inland Revenue Service FPR. And with that, I would like to welcome Mr. Waqasul Hassan to join us for his welcoming remarks. Mr. Hassan has a rich experience in designing and implementing a wide range of development finance programs. He has a special interest in climate-related investment and regulatory reforms, seeding innovations, entrepreneurship, and establishing key institutions that impact the financial landscape in the country. Mr. Waqas, if you could turn on your camera and your mic, please.
Ji Hassan, I have turned on my camera. Can you hear me and see me or no?
I can hear you, but I cannot unfortunately see you.
I don't know why is that the case now. Should I rejoin then? I'm very sorry about it, but what should I do then?
Please try and rejoin. Hopefully that should resolve the issue. Mr. Waqas, if you can hear me, could you try rejoining, please? I believe this is one of the challenges faced by SMEs is poor tax connection in Pakistan, but let's hope Mr. Waqas joins us in a few minutes.
Hassan, can you hear me and see me?
Yes, Dr. Shamshad, I can hear you and see you.
Okay. Can we do another test? Can you see me and hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you and see you. We're waiting for Mr. Waqas to join us.
Yes.
And hopefully, good IT trick of turning it off and on again, and hopefully that works.
I didn't want to delay the process further, so I thought some testing would be better.
No, that's perfect. That's a good idea.
Okay.
I think Mr. Waqas has joined us. Waqas, we can, I think, hear you, but unfortunately, I don't think that we can see you. I think
Hassan, I would request let's start that, but I would suggest that someone at your end that you have not blocked my video.
I'll have it checked out. Maybe we can start with Dr. Shamshad and then we can come back to you. I hope that's not an issue.
So,
Dr. Shamshad, if you can take us away, we will. Thank you.
So I'd like to welcome Minister Saab as well as Waqas, of course, who is very much embedded in this work, and all the colleagues who have contributed to this excellent piece, and the larger audience. This is the launch of Karandaaz research report, the State of Business Taxation in Pakistan, Challenges for SMEs. In terms of my submission, because I didn't want to steal the show of the authors, I have put in some of my ideas. In midst of the macroeconomic crisis, promoting robust, sustained, and inclusive economic growth is critical for Pakistan. Like elsewhere, SMEs that are considered to be a backbone of an economy and industry has the greatest potential to foster growth, competitiveness, and job generation. Sustainable Development Agenda, as all of you may know, emphasizes SMEs' significance and underscores need for rationalizing and strengthening its policy regime and institutional support. Size of SME and its contribution, like every developing country, is significant in Pakistan. I think it's largely because of ease of entry and exit, although people say it's a bit of a challenge on both fronts. But precise estimates of it are difficult to assess because of large informality, ranging from 70 to 80% in South Asia. Evidence indicates that I think South Asia has the largest informality. And also the size of undocumented GDP and the inconsistency in numbers of the two has as yet not been resolved. The spread and penetration in localities have been difficult to reach SMEs fully. Statistical agencies are quite lethargic, it's well known, and their cycle of census and surveys of establishment is with a large gap based on weak methodology driven by extrapolation and based on outdated frames rather than proper sampling frames. So rather than focusing on the real challenges of SME, the government has traditionally designed fragmented policies, regrettably, and each organ and each, sorry, I'm having some difficulty, so, and each organ prescribes and imposes its own mandate and have installed and staffed institutional mechanism that churn out policies, levies that distort production patterns, and subsidies that are not impactful. Moreover, as we know, our financial system does not serve those who have no formal structure or audited accounts and cannot give collaterals. A few examples that we are talking, and in this area, Karandaaz has been working also. Most harm to SME stems from business taxation regime of FBR. As per Karandaaz study, it underscores that the tax regime and its implementation pose a real challenge for the SMEs. Underreporting of SMEs is quite pervasive, both because the entities do not have records and capacity to report, nor do they wish to because of the fear of FBR tax harassment. It would be safe to say that what we don't count, we don't really know. Moreover, SMEs' constraints and dynamics render it difficult to design effective policies and support systems. As we consider the challenge of business taxation, we need to first acknowledge the dire need for reform across the board. Pakistan's tax system we all know is complex, burdensome, and often confusing, significant compliance requirements, challenges for businesses compound, especially for the very small businesses. SME policy framework in Pakistan is fragmented, and entities with conflicting mandates and overriding powers impose their priorities on that policy framework. Taxation structure has for years been regressive, given its dependence on high indirect taxes and on tradable sectors. This has been quite a bit covered in the report. At the same time, exemption of agriculture, real estate, and properties, and low progressivity in direct taxes erodes revenue base. Furthermore, as highlighted by a recently released report by the World Bank, taxes, subsidies, and other distortions create powerful incentives for firms, and households to allocate resources in ways that are suboptimal, while also discouraging innovation and productivity. The tax regime, as per this World Bank report, backed by evidence, indicates extensive export bias. A 10% import duty on a given product increases profits of selling domestically relative to exporting by 40% on average. So it's a major impediment because import duties are always slapped in an ad hoc way by FBR or MOF whenever there is a revenue crisis. If the SMEs want to innovate, they miss out on export subsidies. And World Bank report estimates that it is 80% more likely for a potential exporter that decides to export a traditional product to be eligible for an export subsidy than one that decides to innovate and export a new product. There are more details in the World Bank report along those lines. So let me try to recap a few things and numbers that exist in our report. Business, and especially SMEs, as is well known, account for more than 90% of all businesses, 40% of GDP, and over half of the employment. But low level of exports, 25% is the share. International comparison, which is also offered in this report graphically, illustrates that our SME contribution to economy is lower relative to other countries. I worked on Indonesia, almost all of Southeast Asia, and we are lower in contrast to some of these countries. I have to say that whatever be the case, there is a friction of statistics. It's not easy to know what's going on in the SME sector. And through business harassment, distorted incentive, lack of technology and innovation, we have compressed the opportunities of the SMEs. So what do we need besides the recommendations of the report? I do believe we need a high-powered and analytically equipped and competent SME policy anchor in the country, because we can't rely on this fragmented inputs from different ministries. Such a policy anchor should develop growth and inclusive-centric rather than revenue-centric policies. It has been articulated in this Business for Taxation report. We need to develop a harmonized policy framework for developing and updating database. We need to learn from big data and technology. It has revolutionized the big data across the world, and it offers solutions to this end too. At the same time, financing labor and environmental standards ought to rise beyond the federal provincial devolution considerations to promote national interests. Another proposal that I have is that we need a tax or a public finance institute in Pakistan, like, for instance, in India that I have interfaced with. It should have a mandate to decide tax policy and override MOF, FPR, given their conflict of interest. And it has to be creative to target growth in tax base and collection to be raised from 9.2% of GDP to 20% of average that we have observed in Asia Pacific. FPR has been recipient of significant technical assistance, but its performance remains questionable when measured by the decades of low tax GDP ratio, and it has been unable to expand the tax net base. FPR has this discriminatory regime for filers and non-filers to the advantage of the filers, but the differential is not adequate as I see. And the report singularly goes after the withholding tax regime. So I'm not going to touch on that. It's been very well explained. And it talks about the tax harassment practices, including chasing after small and weaker segments of the taxpayer. It talks about our report talks about suboptimal taxation frameworks and mechanisms. The broader fiscal and macroeconomic challenges are also to be considered in terms of now the debt debates, inflation and economic growth, and so on and so forth. So what do we do in order to stop the harassment of the SMEs is to nurture an equitable, fair and progressive tax policy framework and give more space to the SME sector through the incentive regimes. And also we do need free services of independent appellate and tribunal bodies for the SMEs. And I speak from my experience lately that it's so expensive to litigate with the FPR, not to mention the harassment that follows it. Tax laws and regulations in Pakistan are difficult to understand, even for the most educated. And a lot of people can ill afford accountants or tax experts or legal advisors. So simplification of tax laws for the SMEs in particular has to be of an urgent priority. So while we do have SME hubs in Punjab and in other locations, but it's time we organize SMEs in special clusters and zones to manage a harmonious backward and forward link with the larger industrial incentive regime that the government seems to be offering exclusively to the big industry, that services value addition through technology and innovation and supports exports, but none of these incentives are forwarded by the larger industry to the smaller exporters. So let me conclude that I believe that Pakistan has tremendous potential to overcome these challenges it faces and emerge as a strong and prosperous nation based on pushing for the SME development in a sustainable manner. But this will require bold leadership at the top, a commitment to reform, and a willingness to work together across all sectors of the society. And Karandaaz, as an agency that has played a phenomenal role in financial inclusion, looks forward to working with all stakeholders as together we build a brighter future for our Pakistan. Thank you to all our Karandaaz colleagues, Waqas and Mr. Minister. I'm really delighted that you have joined us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shamshad, for your valuable insights. And now, once again, I would like to invite Mr. Waqas for his remarks.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Chair, for opening and for very insightful suggestions. One of them I've really picked and liked, and I may touch on that in my ads too. Mr. Hassan Iqbal, Dr. Ajib Memon, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, Chairperson, other senior FPR colleagues, esteemed speakers, and valued attendees, Assalamu alaikum. It's an honor to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this important webinar on taxation challenges facing SMEs in Pakistan. Today, we have convened to discuss one of the most pressing and critical issues facing our country's economy, how to enhance our taxation system to ensure sustainable revenue generation and promote inclusive economic growth. Karandaaz, for those of you who don't know, was established in 2014. They focus on improving access to finance for unbanked and underbanked individuals and micro, small, and medium enterprises with the aim of creating jobs and improving livelihoods. Now we use different tools. We use investment, we use technical assistance, and we also use policy advocacy and research to push the frontiers of financial inclusion. So creating knowledge to enable informed policy and decision-making is an integral part of Karandaaz's mandate to promote financial inclusion in Pakistan. And today's effort is one of those activities that we pursue under this agenda. We believe the problem of low access to finance for SMEs requires a multi-pronged approach to finding solutions to neglected issues. One of these issues is the difficulty in doing business in the current taxation regime in Pakistan. The taxation framework is complex and multifaceted. It encompasses various taxes levied at the federal, provincial, and local levels. However, despite its potential to generate substantial revenue, tax evasion and low compliance levels pose significant challenges in the country. According to the latest statistics released by FPR, the tax to GDP ratio in Pakistan stood at 9.2% for the year ended 21-22, remaining stagnant for the year previous year's 9.3%. This figure is significantly lower than the regional average of 19.1% for Asia and Pacific. One of the key challenges facing the taxation system in Pakistan is its inherent complexity, which leads to high compliance costs and burden for taxpayers. An effective tax system should aim to minimize distortions, facilitate ease of collection, avoid discrimination, and garner acceptability. Our experts suggest that Pakistan's current tax policy does not adhere to these fundamental principles. According to the 2020 Doing Business report, Pakistan ranks 161st out of 190 economies for the paying tax indicator, which underscores the difficulty and complexity of complying with tax regulations in the country. Having said all of that, I must also acknowledge that the job of FPR is extremely tough too. The burden of raising revenue for a struggling economy where enough space for public experimentation, for policy experimentation is not available, solely falls on the shoulders of FPR. I recall having an illuminating discussion with one of the senior colleagues of FPR that how the objectives of tax collection come at odds and are in sharp contrast to that of growth. For instance, if some concession is to be given for growth or import of machinery, it may be badly needed for increasing the size of pie and eventually increase in tax as a percentage of GDP. However, the cost in terms of reduced tax revenue has to be paid today. The FPR has to find another head to make for the shortfall because the revenue need of the country and economy are not usually adjusted down with such concession. These are policy questions. They require serious debate, serious thinking, serious research. One does wonder how much room and headspace is actually available for some high-level policy thinking or such adjustments. Karandaaz is organizing, working for SMEs and promotion of, and working for promotion of investment in the country. I will make this point that till the time right incentive for investment in business and real economic activity, which creates jobs and generates taxes and contributes to GDP are not provided, capital allocation will remain skewed to sectors which enjoy preferential tax treatment, real estate being one of those. The government of Pakistan has undertaken several measures in recent years to enhance tax compliance and boost revenue collection, such as introducing a tax amnesty scheme and leveraging technology to streamline tax administration, to make it more business friendly. In addition to income tax, the country levies federal excise duty and customs duty to generate revenue and safeguard domestic industries. But what is really lacking in all of this is a very coherent thinking or research-based foundation on which the taxpayer and the tax collector has confidence that we are moving in the right direction. I think the idea that Chair just provided of Public Finance Institute is great. As an independent body, the prescriptions by that body or the research conducted by that body need not be mandatory by the FBR or Ministry of Finance or for the business, but at least a forum would be available where independent research can be conducted, and this institute or an organization can create knowledge with an objective to promote long-term sustainable economic growth in the country. Today's discussion will provide us with a unique opportunity to gain insights on the state of taxation and explore the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for Pakistan. We are privileged to have with us a distinguished panel of speakers who will share their experiences and knowledge on the pertinent issue. I'm confident that this webinar will be a platform to share and gain valuable insights on how we can collectively work towards a more effective and efficient tax system in Pakistan, creating ease of business, especially for SMEs. I will end by acknowledging the efforts of Ali Khizr and Niaz Akbar for leading this activity, and thank the research and communications team led by Meher and great work done by Ali Akbar and now Hassan for undertaking this research and bringing it to a point where we are making it public today. Once again, thank you for joining us and hope you will find today's webinar informative and engaging. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikas, for your comments. And while the Minister Saab had to step out momentarily, and while we wait for him to get back, I would now like to invite Mr. Ali Khizr and Mr. Niaz Akbar for the presentation, which highlights this finding of the report. And while we do that, I would like to introduce both of them. Niaz Akbar is a former civil servant with a master's in business management and a master's in international and development economics. He has worked both in the private and public sector for the last 25 years, which includes 13 years with the Inland Revenue Service and the Government of Punjab in various capacities. While Ali Khizr is an economist and business analyst, he has 20 years of experience in economic analysis and commentary, managing economic research teams, leading project teams, reports, and column writing. He has worked in the financial sector, development sector, media, and is advising the big corporate macroeconomics happenings. Ali and Niaz, I would like to invite you guys for the presentation. And hopefully we'll have, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A comment below, and we'll try and answer them after the end of the presentation.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Hassan, can you flash the presentation? I shared it with Meher.
Yeah, sure. Just give me a few moments. Let me line it up for you. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes. Ali?
Yeah, thank you, Niaz. Hassan, can you maximize it? Like, this. So, as what the purpose of the study is, and as described by the chairperson and CEO of the Karandaaz is about that the state of the business taxation is challenging for Pakistan, especially for the SME sector and generally for the manufacturing sector in Pakistan. And there are gaps in the policy and implementation, which eludes the SMEs to really, reach its potential. So this presentation and this study is primarily about identify the SME landscape, and based on that, we try to give what are the issues in the SME in terms of the compliances and all that. And then we did some study, some survey and finding of that from the what are the issues from the government side and from the SME side, and that's going to describe the finding of the study. If we can move to the next slide, please.
Just give me a moment. I don't know why it's not.
Sure. And there's
I-
some background noise coming up from someone who is on mute.
Let me check. Just give me a second. I don't know why this is not go forward. Let's try again. Can you guys see it now?
Yeah, we can see that. Thank you. Thank
Right.
you, Hassan. So if we see that SME is a kind of backbone of Pakistan economy, and it's the case in many other economies, and it has a significant share of contribution in different economies. When you see in terms of employment, it's very high in Pakistan at 78%, whereas you see in the Thailand, Korea, Indonesia, and the South Asian countries, it's higher than Pakistan. But in India and Bangladesh and the Pakistan is much higher than that. Then the SME share in total enterprise, again, it's very high in Pakistan, it's 90%, and but that being the case in the most of the other countries, and other countries are even higher in terms of the share of the enterprises of the SMEs. So in terms of GDP, it's about 30% of Pakistan. That is inconsistent with many other economies around, apart from the Turkey, where it is much higher, and the South Korea, again, it's much higher. And then you do see the export to share of exports to GDP. That's in Pakistan is about 25%, which is less than India and Turkey and Korea, but it's better than a few other economies. There's the caveat to tell you about this whole the analysis is that there are varying definitions of the SMEs in different sectors, and the size of the SME in terms of the employment and in terms of the revenues could vary significantly when we compare in different economies. But we are for consistency, we're using the definition that's been provided by that, and these are these sources are corroborated from the ADB and other websites as well. Can you move to scroll down, like, please? Yeah. So as we see this, we describe this the contribution to GDP and everything. And can you move to the next slide, please? Just one more, please. Yeah, thank you. So it's a backbone of economies, and we see that, but still there's the SMEs are resource starved and operate substantially under potential, struggling to get capacity and growth. That's a big challenge in Pakistan. So the government policies, have been late to catch up. I mean, whenever there is a gap, a government comes in late, and the gaps increase and all that, and then cat and mouse game is going on in that. So, but that's a global phenomena as well. So but in many economies, like you see, the last decade, there is a concentrated effort to focus on the private sector development, especially SMEs. There are intervention which we could see in different economies, but we've seen that is that they have financial support to subsidies that such as the markup scheme, where the markups are lower for SMEs relative to the other businesses, and the overall improved access to finance through coming up with innovative solution and digital solutions and all that, where the collateral and other impediments are being drawn back. And then the building the financial infrastructure. Look, okay, apart from the bank financing, what other options of financing available? How can SMEs access the capital market? Then how the startup culture and that going at that, helping the SMEs to move into that. And then the financial literacy and filing knowledge gaps. So these are there, like, to educate SMEs on the benefit of getting financing, and how can they bridge in the finance the knowledge gaps to spur up the innovation path. And the regulatory environment is being eased so that the compliance cost is low and they can concentrate more on their business efficiencies and innovation. And the technology and value addition, of course, that's an integral part of that, and labor full skill upgradation and all those factors are there. Can you slide down, please? But when you see that in Pakistan, those efforts where the intent of those efforts you can see across in the past 15 years or so, those efforts haven't yielded into results. Like for example, there was an SME policy that was announced in 2007, but then came the financial crisis, the interest rate move up. There was a large NPLs coming from the SME sector. Then you have a problem of the courts where the bankruptcies laws are absent, or the recourse of the loans for the banks are hard. So banks kind of fizzled away from the SMEs, and then they moved to the big corporate and the government, and then the focus in an SME could never revert back what was perceived to be in 2007 and how the things were going between 2004 and 7. Then there was a credit guarantee scheme announced again. There's a Karandaaz and Tiffin was involved in it, and it's 2010. But and they did with the SPP, and they tried to do a good job and all that, but it's mostly underutilized and all that. And still the efforts are going on to form a company and all that, and then there's some political and other issues came in, and that's in the back burner as of now. Then the State Bank introduced the prudential regulation for SME financing. Where there's an official definition of SMEs. They have redefined it. They are concentrated on increasing the loans to the bank SMEs. They wish introduce the mandatory targets and all that. And then the State Bank last year was in the plan of coming up another scheme for SMEs that's called ASAN, where the small, the S part of the MEs were going to give a very, very decent price loan. But again, with the change in government and change in the macroeconomic conditions, that SME ASAN scheme is in the back burner, and we don't see it happening as of now. Then there's an SME policy again that was announced in 2021, and since again because of the two reasons I've actually said earlier, they are not being adopted. Can you move the cursor like the more into the slide, please? So one of the biggest hurdle is tax base, enforcing tax laws and collecting taxes that ultimately leads to tax evasion and informally in the capacity of an institution to obtain reliable and social in the efficient and timely manner. And we've seen that in the past 7-8 years, when there's a forceful way of increasing the tax base, and by discriminating between the filer and non-filer, and the imposition of the withholding taxes, which has increased, and the withholding agent and all that, you see that SMEs have been moved into the informality, and that you can see from the increase in the currency in circulation and the cash in circulation, and other factors, and the different studies which we have conducted and talk about those informality in the economy that's been growing, and because of that, the SMEs access to the formal finance and other schemes is hard to get by. Can you move to the next here? Yeah, more on this. I think there was more. Yeah, thank you. So I mean, then there's other problem is in Pakistan again. There's a dearth of data. I mean, this data is not a problem which is there for the past 7 years. It's been there everywhere, and without really knowing the exact data, it's very hard to, or a good approximation of the data, it's very hard to form any policy and target of the implementation. One thing is about the definition of the SMEs. Like there was one good survey conducted by the SMETA in 2005 with the PBS, where they came up with a number of SMEs, including the microfinance institutions. It's about 2.8 million in Pakistan. And now we are talking in 2013, and there is no other study which is conducted there to talk about how many SMEs are today and what is the growth from the 2005 to today. And there being approximations used by different people that how to have those. One way to is based on the electricity connection that the line discos, and then the K Electric, they all have their commercial and industrial connection. Once you leave that to industrial and commercial connection, if you use that number, we come out with somewhere like number of SMEs in Pakistan about 5.2 million. But again, there is a caveat in that. some of the connections are dormant, so we don't know how much connections are dormant. Some of the maybe factories have more than one connection, and then there are many cottage and the small industries where we're working where the domestic connection are being used for the industrial and commercial activities. That's all that. So it's just an approximation and all that. So then we use another approximation to find out is that's about the population growth. We assume that the way the population is growing, the SMEs are growing at the same rate, and based on that, we come up with a number somewhere about 4.1 million, and then we use another suggestion about the based on the GDP growth, the way the GDP is growing, the real GDP growth, the SME must be growing similar on that way. And that way we come about somewhere like a 5 million SME. So in a way that from 2.8 million, we are around 4.4 to 5 million SMEs as of now, that including the microfinance entities as well. And but we need a study, we need a proper census, and where we can pinpoint that how many SMEs are there and what are the characteristics geographically in terms of the businesses and in terms of the other areas, employment and all that. So then the other problem is, as I talked about, that there's a definition problem as well, and so those all problems need to be addressed before we can really form a policy for the SME. Can you move to the next slide, please? So the definition, you see that there's a definition problem. The SMEDA was using one definition, State Bank is using one definition, FPR is using one definition. And there's an inherent conflict between the way the State Bank is defining and the way the SME is defining. The State Bank is defining in terms of the revenues and in terms of employment, there's not much a problem, but an employment but in terms of revenue, the State Bank would like to have, like, to see that the growth in the revenues with the inflation and all that. So, and then the definition is State Bank is based on that higher revenues, the more concession to be provided. But FPR wants in definition lower revenues so that they cannot shift from the commercial and the large corporate to the SMEs, where the more taxation is, as they provide the concessionary taxation for the SMEs. So that issue is there, and we need to address and come up with a one definition of this. Move to the next slide, please. And so I'll just skim through these because we're running short of the time. But again, this is a very important. See that the Pakistan, the taxation is relying very much on the and on the indirect taxes. If you see over the issue, the ratio of the direct taxes, which is blue, is increasing, but the indirect taxes are increasing more, and those within the direct taxes, the contribution of the indirect taxes, the taxes in direct form with the withholding tax have increased definitely, not that. But the reliance, and with the recent GST imposition, higher rate imposition, the share of the indirect taxes is going to increase up further. Can you move to the next slide, please? So this is a very simple slide and self-explanatory and all that. That the total debt to GDP, which is the trap country Pakistan as of now, is very much linked to the total tax revenues. If the revenues are falling, the tax to GDP is falling, and that's linked to the tax that fiscal deficit. Move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, this is very important. This slide is very important but the increase in the withholding tax regime has an impediment on the formalization of the SME sector and its access to finance and other concession schemes or other advantages of the formalities. If you see that on the graph that and 2007, that the withholding taxes as a share of the direct taxes was moved down to 50%. And you see that FY2 to FY7, this was moving down, and this was the time when the SME was growing, the share of the SME in the private credit, the share of the SME in the overall GDP, that was growing. That was prime time. But after that, again, the withholding tax started increasing, and now 71% of the tax is being collected through withholding and all that. And then these indirect taxes are aggressive in nature. We all know that. And there are about 182 different transactions and 42 incomes that were captured by the withholding regime. So the lot of time wasted by the SMEs and the compliance in terms of the entrepreneur own time, and in terms of the resources by hiring accountant and all that. And the number of withholding agents had increased from less than 20 to over 125,000 in from 1995 to 2007. Now there are SMEs and there are companies, they become the withholding agent on the supplier on that. So they're not only responsible for the tax collection of their own, but tax collection of their supplier. And because of that very factor, many SMEs are moving into the informal sector, because that's a big pain in that. And then, withholding is collected through imports, and about 50% of our tax is collected at the imported stage. And again, that's an indirect form. Can you move the cursor? There are like a couple of more points in this slide, please. And when you see this 7% of the direct taxes are withholding, only 5 to 7% of those taxes are due to the efforts of the FPR through audit or through active movement. They collect that direct taxes, and the rest of the 20 odd percent taxes are voluntary. When you file your tax returns, you give your own assessment and all that. So the FPR effort in collection of the direct taxes is only 5%. So that's the state of the FPR. Move the slide, please. So this is a big problem over there. So withholding tax, FPR in effectiveness to collect the direct taxes, reliance of the withholding agents, number of compliances, and different transaction be tax, all these are taking people away from the formal taxation system. Next slide, please. Then there is another problem. If you see this, the contribution to the GDP, agriculture is about 20%, the share in taxation is 2%, services about 31%, the share in taxation is about 15%, the manufacturing is about 12%, while the share in taxation is much higher, 37%, so it's forth. When you see the burden of the taxation, that is very high on the manufacturing and mining, well, it's very less on the construction services and agriculture. And how they see that's how the SMEs are growing in the services and construction sector, while many few SMEs and even big businesses are moving in manufacturing and mining, where the real juice of exports and import substitution relies on. Can you move this more in? There's more in the slide, please. Yeah. So this narrowness is gauged by this factor, and this whole thing is about that 75% of GDP is from service and agriculture, but the share in total tax revenue is less than 10%. So this is a big issue. Unless we resolve this issue, there's going to be the taxation is going to be the skew towards the formal manufacturing sector, and the formal manufacturer sector will keep on squeezing, and that would impede your export potential and SME growth in those sectors. Move to the next slide, please. Now, this another problem, that the tax is costly, and there's so much of compliance in that. There's a study by PwC which talks about that sales tax return on goods are filed every month, and the sales tax on services are every month, and then if you are moving in different provinces, you have to have a different provinces sales tax services, right? Because all the provinces have their own now rates, and have their own the revenue authorities and all that. And then the withholding tax and sales tax returns are filed at the end of the year. And when you combine all those, the income tax, withholding, sales tax on goods and services, the 13 times these taxes are to be applied. And for local sales, they have to have 5 times at the end of the year. And on exports, and then on the services, if you are operating in the 4 provinces you have, and the center, you have to have a 61 number of times sales tax and services is filed a year. So 61 times someone is providing service in 4 provinces is to file a return. This is a much higher cost than that. And this cost is incurred by these people, and because of that, they try to remain informal, or the margin are being squeezed because of that. So this is a problem that a normal SME files 18 returns every year, services file 61. returns every year, and all those adding to the cost, and that's impeding their growth and discouraging them to move to the formal segment, and that reduces their access to the schemes and policy intervention which state bank, government, and Karandaaz and others are trying to do. Move to next slide, please. Now, West, estimating that there's a cost of the compliance is about four to $6,000 annually. An SME is paying in terms of those costs, which is very huge. They're making 34 payments. Then there's 84 hours are required for VAT refund. Then the VAT refund requires 79 weeks, and then the corporate income tax correction required 67 weeks. Then a corporate income tax correction required 16 weeks. Then, the 283 hours are required to comply with taxes. And if you take the cost of that hour, again, these costs are taken last year when the dollar rate was 182. So the in PKR, the rate must have gone up with the inflation and all that. But that's about the annual cost of compliance in different scenarios, and about $4,000 to $8,000, what we are trying to figure out in this. And now these costs are making the problems for those SMEs to return file, and they're reducing their margin, and again I'm talking in again, that makes them to move towards the informality. Having said that, this is a two-way problem. I mean, we all talk about the SMEs. When we go to SMEs, they talk about the compliance of the government problem and all that. But we understand that these SMEs, that all those SMEs run two books. Every SME we talk to, the auto sector, A sector, B sector, C sector, they're having two books. One book is for the FPR and the banks, and one book for their own. And because of those two books, they constrain their growth in the formal sector. So they are not coming from the mindset to go towards that, and government is not coming from the mindset to control, to ease the control, and that mistrust is going at. That's where the potential is losing. Next slide, please. So here the point is this, that the SME says that tax are complex for small firms. Yes, it is there. The cost of compliance is very high. The performing withholding agent duty is very costly. Of course, you have to get taxes from your supplier, and if that supplier is informal, which is most of the case in that, then you have to add on to the cost or in your price, and that becomes, tax becomes the indirect tax, and that becomes a part of the price, and that eludes you to from exports, because you lose the competitiveness because of that price, and there's no refunds into that price, and the refund mechanism very costly. And that the problem is that they are defiling different kind of tax, sales tax, varying from 11 to 18% now, and 5 to 18%, and their refunds are stuck over there, and for their refunds they have to borrow from the banks, and when the interest rate move on, the borrowing costs become high, and in today the interest cost is about 20% and all that, and taxation has become 18%. So the gap between the refunds is increasing, and the cost of requiring that refund is increasing further. So that's hampering the margin, and when we see that we built up the different scenarios that rate increase by 1%, the margin is reduced by somewhere around 0.16 to 1%. So that's when we see this, that's how it's happening. And that's all taking the SMEs away from the formal sector. But again, they are running two books as all that, as I mentioned, all that. So it's a two-way problem. Next slide, please. So we did a survey, and we asked a similar set of questions to both the government and SMEs. The both feelings are intense, but they are not mutual. There's a degrees of separation how they feel about different things. So here is that one is that that's something which is extremely affecting, and then and five is not affecting all that. So if we see that the ad hoc policy and rate change, SME thinks yes, it's very challenging, but but the government saying it's neutral. That huge burden of taxpayer, again, SMEs are saying that it's very challenging. Government is saying neutral. Too many taxpayers, SME is saying very challenging, but government is going extremely challenging. But here, but something very interesting. If you see discriminatory tax system, SMEs are rating as 2, that's very challenging, and government is saying this is not at all challenging. So they're very diverting on that. Then when you see, does the current tax regime discourage SME from formalizing, where SME saying yes, that discourages, government say it doesn't discourage us. So their thinking are not aligned at some point of time, and that's another problem. So SMEs thinks in a different way, the government thinks in a different way, but at some point they all agree that there are problems, but there are problems of degrees like separation, degrees of separation. But some places like their thinking is very different. So that this just not the misconception, mistrust, all those are combining into the situation what we are today. Next slide, please. So, I mean, this is very simple that what kind of framework we required, we need to move beyond revenue centricity and move through the goal of building a cohesive, collaborative, and simplified tax regime that eliminates all the noise in this, that you have to cut the rate, you have to have a policy consistency, you need to have harmonization, painless tax administration, smart regulation, use of the IT, swift refunds, FPR, human resource reforms, handling and facilitation. You have to have a growth mindset, rewarding the formality, that's very important, accessible automation, rate cuts and all. So all those things which are saying are important and all that, but it's very hard to implement this in a way. I stop here and I have asked Niaz to add anything which I've missed, as the Niaz and Huma, we all work very hard on that. And so Niaz, over to you now.
Thank you, Ali. I think you've covered most of the stuff that needed to be covered. Again, can you move back one slide, please, Hassan? So again, if we look at this, the findings of the survey, like Ali said, there's not much difference in terms of acceptance of the problem. It's just a degree different. So when the SMEs, so the survey was done for the challenges on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the worst and most challenging, and 1 being the less, like Ali said. And if you look at all of these, the government does accept there is a problem. In some cases, a degree less, but in other cases, a degree more. For example, if you look at too many tax payments, the government thinks that that is one of the things that is extremely challenging for the SMEs. So at the end of the day, I think there is a realization. But having said that, and like Dr. Shamshad also said, FBR works for the increase of revenue because it has been basically directed to do that. And it doesn't look at the overall environment or the economic growth. I mean, if we look at the budgets, they and the revenue increases that come with the budgets, they show that the economy and the state of the businesses is really not taken into consideration. Even with negative growth rates, we want to raise taxes. Naturally, we want to do it through bringing on board people that are not registered and businesses that are out of the system. But then that's very difficult, especially when meeting revenue targets is a very short-term and immediate thing, and you don't have actually time to do medium-term and long-term interventions. So having said that, FBR has its hands full. I mean, in terms of even the withholding taxes, while we say that withholding taxes have been passed on to the taxpayer, FBR does do monitoring. And we've seen in the past that the withholding agents sometimes do not deposit the tax that they have withheld, and they just keep them in their accounts and earn profit on them. And contractors especially have done that. So FBR does put in effort to monitor those withholding agents, but again, we have to sort of move away from the withholding tax regime and move towards the direct taxation. So I think that's all. I think Ali has covered. So that's all from my side as well.
Thank you, Ali and Niaz, for your wonderful presentation. We do have a few questions if you guys would oblige us and help us answer them. So let me go through them and let me pick. Okay, so we have a question by Sharik Hassan who's asking, what do you suggest if withholding tax is abolished? If anyone of you could take this question, please.
That's a very interesting question. So, I mean,
Ali, we can't
it's a
hear you.
chicken. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, it's a very interesting question. I mean, it's a chicken and egg problem. I mean, that's a problem we discussed with the FPR and all that. Okay, what if you lower the tax rates? That would increase the compliance. What would if you remove this withholding taxes? What would you move away from tax collection on the import stage? So they say that whenever we move like a tax rate 1% up or 1% down, there's a decline in the collection or increase in the collection proportionately. So there are certain certain set of people who file the taxes and all that. If we reduce, that will reduce and all that. And because it may take few years and some kind of a trust building between between the taxpayer and the tax collector, and but the problem is this: at every given year, we have a challenge of tax collection. We have running up a perpetual fiscal problem, and FPR the revenue targets are very important. So you have to get out of the mindset of that revenue target in the short to medium term to have an impact in the medium to long term. And because of that pressure, you never be able to experiment this. Niaz, would you like to add anything in it?
No, sir, I think you've covered it. Thank you.
We have one more
anything.
question. Yes, sorry, my apologies. I was on mute. I have one more question. Then I think that should be that, and then we'll move on. This is by Dr. Hamid Atiq, who is asked, when we talk about the 25% share in export, does it include the value chain export SMEs or it's only direct exports?
Well, it's mainly the direct exports. That's a very interesting question that we don't have that study and we don't have that how to control have that value chain export. Like for example, when you have a garment, someone is selling that garment is being supplied. Supplied. The buttons are supplied by someone. Someone is doing the dyeing. Someone is making the weaving. Someone is doing the yarn. Someone is doing the ginning and all that. So those all the value addition we don't have that, but this all contribute to that. But that is not there. Niaz, would you like to add in it?
No, sir. I think it's clear. The answer that it doesn't include the value chain.
Okay, and I think this is the one last one. This is more of a comment and not a question. It's by Ali Yar from Muhafiz. He says another major issue for SMEs regarding taxes submission is that they have limited cash flows. Often there are credit sales which are paid by a client after 3 or 4 months, yet sales tax regulations require to submit the returns on accrual basis. I suggest if the tax authorities amend their policies in accordance with cash received basis, it will help big time for SMEs to manage their cash flows. What do you guys think of this?
Niaz, I would like you to take this.
I think we have Chairman PRA here and Dr. Hamid. I would request them to take this question. Zain Saab, Dr. Saab.
जी अली मेरी आवाज थोड़ी कट रही है.
Can you hear me, Hassan?
Yes, I can hear you. What were you saying?
I was saying that we have a Chairman PRA and Dr. Hamid Atiq here, who has been member policy, and I would request them to take this question as it would be a much better answer coming from them.
Actually, Dr. Hamid is already a panelist, so we will put that to him. And with that, I would like to thank you guys for this presentation. And now I think I'll invite the panel number 1 for the panel discussion. I hope you guys stick around for that. But once again, thank you so much. And I think now we will have the participants from panel 1. Unfortunately, our moderator Ali Akbar isn't feeling well, and Meher Shah will be moderating that session. She is Director RMC Karandaaz. And on that panel, we have the panel discussion is titled Challenges Faced by SMEs in Compliance with Tax Policies. And for that panel, we have Syed Nabil Hashmi, who's chairman of the SNH Group. He is former chairman of Pakistan Auto Parts Manufacturing Association and Pakistan Plastic Manufacturing Association. He's also former chairman PIEDMC and current board member of Engineering Development Board of Pakistan. And we also have Mariam Sarib, who is the founder and CEO of Insta Energy, a solar power company in Pakistan. The company's mission is to provide reliable, sustainable, and cost-effective solar energy to its customers. Established in 2018 from Islamabad, the company now has operations in Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, and Peshawar with an installed base of 3 megawatts. Mariam has a master's in business administration from IPA Karachi and MS from Birkbeck College, University of London. We have Asfandyar Farooq, who is Senior Vice Chairman, Chain Store Association of Pakistan. He has a combined experience of over 17 years in the area of luxury and fashion, retail and e-commerce, and manufacturing and export of leather products. Since 2017, Asfandyar has been in a leadership role at the Chain Store Association of Pakistan, which is the official trade body for organized retail in the country. And lastly, we have Ahsan Malik, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Pakistan Business Council, a research-based business advocacy body composed of the leading businesses in Pakistan, including the larger multinational companies from 14 countries. And prior to joining PBC in January 2016, he was the CEO of Unilever Pakistan for 9 years. And with that, I think I'll ask them to join us on the panel. We already have Meher, and let's hope that the rest of them join us. If you can hear me, Asfandyar and Ehsan are online, and so is Nabil Saab. Can you please promote them? And so is Mariam.
I think we're having quite a bit of trouble with our bandwidths today. It'll just take a minute. We're just promoting our panelists for panel 1.
While we wait, Hamid Saab, if you can hear me in that meanwhile, can you please share your thoughts on this comment, which was made by Aliyah Muhafiz? If you can hear me.
You need to repeat the question.
It isn't a question, it's more of a comment. He said, Aliyah from Hafiz said, another major issue for SMEs regarding taxes submission is that they have limited cash flows. Often their credit sales, which are paid by client after 3 or 4 months, yet sales tax regulations require to submit the returns on accrual basis. I suggest if the sales tax authorities amend their policies in accordance with cash received basis, it will help big time for SMEs to manage their cash flows. If you could share your thoughts on this viewpoint.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think there are provisions in law in which the tax liability can be deferred with a little bit of a delayed interest payment, but nevertheless, there is not actually a compulsion of credit sale declaration. It was only for the cars, the advances. Generally what I've seen that people do not declare it until they receive cash. They have this facility, although by the letter of law, it is desirable that whenever the sale happens, they should show it. I'm not very sure about the strive mechanism, which is matching the sales and purchases of one person to other. But nevertheless, it's a good suggestion. If it can be for small and medium, it can be deferred till actual cash receipts. It will be good. I think system is already providing such facilities, but with some interest which can be removed.
Thank you so much, Hamid, for that. And I think the panelists have joined us, and we will wait for you in panel number 2.
So I can see all our panelists in the participant link.
Yeah, let me check. I think there's a slight bandwidth
Yes.
issue. Let me check with IT and let me see.
Could I request our panelists for panel number 1 to please rejoin? I think we seem to be having trouble promoting you. Gee, so we have sent the panelists for panel number 1 direct panelist links. If I could please request you to rejoin using those links.
Hello, this is Emil from Ministry of Planning. We are here to announce that the minister will shortly in the next 3 to 5 minutes, please.
Nadeem Sab, I think we can't hear you clearly. सुन सकते हैं तो please respond करें.
Can you hear me now?
बहुत हल्की आ रही है लेकिन थोड़ा कोशिश करनी पड़ रही है.
ये चेक करें क्यों हल्की आ रही है आवाज.
अब बेहतर है, मे बी डिस्टेंस करके हो सकता है, अब थोड़ी बेहतर हुई है.
I'm trying to tell you कि जी वो Minister Planning will join in the next 5 minutes, please.
ठीक है, चलो, thank you so much. ठीक है, we can. So unfortunately, I think the minister, or fortunately, the minister will be joining us. He is free from his other pressing matters. So once again, I'll have to ask the panelists to wait, and the Minister Sahab will address his keynote address. And while we do that, I think we still have Ali and Niaz. So in the meantime, I think I had one more question. I think we can try and answer that. This was by Abdul Manan. He had asked, can withholding taxation be replaced by a small fixed monthly tax? This will bring SMEs in the documented segment. So Ali and Niaz, what are your thoughts on this?
That's a very good question, and I could relate this to the previous question when we talked about that reducing the tax rates and all that, or easing the compliance. So when you do essentially this, and this would mean that those withholding where you're withholding your income, you replace it with the actual income tax. Now the question is this: that how many would file this? So the FPR, or the tax policy people apprehension, which I think Dr. Hamid Atiq is here. He can tell you much better now that the people are not willing to pay. In the past, when they have experienced experiment such things, they've increased that the tax collection is reduced a lot. At that, but this takes time. You cannot have like a switch on and switch off. But because of our problem of collection all the time hanging at top of the balance, we can never do that. So the real problem is this, because the FPR is having two hats simultaneously. One hat is the collection hat and one hat the policy hat. And the collection hat is like always forcing do this, and this coming from the top because of the fiscal deficit high, and because of this high fiscal deficit, the current account is under pressure. Because of that current account, your exchange rate in the pressure, inflation, and all that. So this whole macro cycle is so jeopardized and so short-sighted. Because of that, we cannot really work on that, but we need to work on that. I think we need to work on those, on simplification of taxation and all that. I think one way to deal with this is to bring the provinces into the equation. I mean, the tax where we see the less tax collection is coming from the land, and on the agriculture, where it's wrapped up, and many of the services which are not really the withholding and all that are not really effective and all that. So if you concentrate on those areas somehow, and then you start working on the other areas, then it can help. So I think this from my side. Niaz or Dr. Hamid Adi may add something more to it.
Thank you, Ali. Again, what Ali said, when the new law was introduced in 2001, the income tax order in 2001, the basis of it was self-assessment with audit. And when this happened, and because this was the Musharraf regime, people thought that, this time around, well, self-assessment has been extended to everybody. Audits are going to be conducted. And, if you look at the graph of the revenues, it increased. But the audit was not conducted, and the government did not allow FBR to, conduct the audit for the self-assessment. And there were major issues. And if you see, after 2-3 years, it started dipping again. So self-assessment sort of, became something which people knew would not happen, or which people knew would get away with. So we have a culture of, sort of not paying our taxes. It could be due to all those factors that we've talked about in the survey, ad hoc policy changes. It's a chicken and egg situation where, FBR feels that if we extend, a lot of facilitation, a lot of, easy, taxation policies, our revenue will fall down. Whereas the businesses feel that FBR, is being very difficult. So again, they have to meet somewhere in between. But again, like Ali said, revenue collection, tops economic growth policy and everything. And we always, short of money, and FBR has been tasked to do that. So it just does that. Dr. Saab?
If I can come in, you should understand that this year's tax rate target of FBR is 7.6 trillion rupees, and out of it, the federal government will only get about 3.5 trillion, and it's already bankrupt. And there is a 2.2 trillion rupees dependence on withholding taxes. So this is not something which can be wished away by a paltry replacement of a small tax of 50 billion rupees. So it's an existential problem of the country that if this tax goes away, where will we export our debt servicing or defense or the ordinary thing, or even the provincial governments? 60% of the taxes go to provincial governments. So FBR is now a major provincial revenue earner. So it cannot be wished away, but in 3 to 5 to 10 years time, we need to move away from it. And hopefully we will, but not in the very short term.
Thank you. I think Mr. Saab is ready for his keynote address, and I think we are setting it up. And I think before that, I have a last comment by Aswandhyar, who has commented that withholding tax rates of 4 to 4.45% on goods and 8 to 10% on services are used more for revenue generation, while they should be used for documentation at a nominal rate. Example, 0.25% withholding tax has recently been applied on FMCG and few other goods, which also matches with the reduced 0.25% minimum tax rate, which has made it easier for documentation of FMCG trade. And I think with that, I would like to hand over the mic to Mr. S.N. Iqbal, who is the Federal Minister for Planning, Development, Special Initiatives and Planning Commission, Pakistan. He is also serving as the Deputy Secretary General for Pakistan Muslim League Noon. He is also chairman for Better Pakistan Foundation, a non-profit organization managed in economic and social development areas. He was professor of management at M.A. Jinnah University, Islamabad, Pakistan. His previous appointments include Chief Coordinator / Minister of State, Pakistan, Deputy Chairman, Planning Commission, Chairman, Good Governance Group, Government of Pakistan, Chairman, Pakistan Engineering Board, and Chairman, National Steering Committees on IT and TQM and Productivity. And with that, I would like to welcome Mr. Hassan Iqbal for his keynote address this session.
Do we have any foreigner or all Pakistanis?
So we have all Pakistanis.
Obviously, let me go and Urdu. I think that will be easy. Well, I'll save my jaws some hard work and it will be easier for me to speak.
No, understandable.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I would like to really thank you कि आपने मुझे इस important discussion में शरीक होने का मौका दिया. As you know that today we are facing an unprecedented economic crisis. In countries 75 years, probably we have never been in as serious and a complex crisis as we are today. और इसकी जो bottom line है वो दो deficits हैं कि जो इस वक्त काफी हमारे लिए बेकाबू हुए हैं. एक fiscal deficit और दूसरा current account deficit. और इस वजह से इस वक्त पाकिस्तान बहुत संगीन challenges से भी गुजर रहा है. मैं आपको ये भी बताना चाहता हूँ कि 2018 में जब मैं यहाँ पर था तो हमारा डेवलपमेंट बजट 1000 बिलियन था. आज 4 साल के बाद जब 22 में वापस आया मैं तो इट वाज 550 बिलियन रुपीस और अब इस साल 727 अरब रुपया हुआ है. तो अगर आप 4 सालों में सिर्फ इन्फ्लेशन को भी लें तो इट शुड हैव बीन 1400, 1600, 1800 somewhere there. So that is just one indicator to tell you where we have gone. We have not progressed, we have regressed. Secondly, 1st April को जो Ministry of Finance है उसने पाकिस्तान की तारीख में पहली दफा ये कहा कि हम डेवलपमेंट बजट के लास्ट क्वार्टर की जो इंस्टॉलमेंट है वो रिलीज नहीं कर सकते. Now this had never happened in the history of the country. When we exploded nuclear devices, there were sanctions on us. Even during those sanctions, we were able to fund our development budget throughout the year. तो ये हमारी हुकूमत आने से 10 रोज पहले ही फाइनेंस मिनिस्ट्री ऐलान कर चुकी थी कि वो लास्ट क्वार्टर के लिए जो 240 अरब रुपए की किस्त है वो जारी करने के लिए वसाइल नहीं रखती. तो ये एक सूरत हाल थी जिसमें से अब हम निकले हैं या निकल रहे हैं जिसका सामना कर रहे हैं. अब पाकिस्तान की अगर आप बैलेंस शीट देखें तो इस साल हुकूमत को जो उसके टैक्स रेवेन्यू है और नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू है वो मिला के 5200 अरब रुपए बनते हैं, 5200 बिलियन. और इस साल अंदेशा है कि जो डेट सर्विसिंग है वो तकरीबन 5000 अरब के लगभग होगी. अब आप खुद अंदाजा कीजिए कि जब आपकी बैलेंस शीट ये हो कि जिसमें आपने तकरीबन जितने आमदनी लेनी है वो सारी की सारी कर्जों को अदा करने पर लगा देनी है और आपके जो वैलिड एक्सपेंडिचर हैं चाहे वो कॉस्ट ऑफ रनिंग द गवर्नमेंट है, चाहे वो डेवलपमेंट है, चाहे वो डिफेंस है, चाहे वो पेंशन्स हैं, चाहे वो सब्सिडीज हैं, वो सारी की सारी आपने मजीद उधार लेके पूरे करने हैं खसारे को. तो फिर आप किस स्टेट के अंदर है. लिहाजा ये जो सूरत हाल है ये बहुत सीरियस चैलेंजेस पोज कर रही है. एक तरफ तो इकोनॉमी के लिए और दूसरी तरफ हर एंटरप्राइज के लिए, चाहे वो एसएमई है, चाहे वो लार्ज बिजनेस है या वो माइक्रो बिजनेस है. तो इस सारी सूरत हाल के नतीजे में इस वक्त जो इन्फ्लेशन है वो बेकाबू है. उस इन्फ्लेशन को काबू करने के लिए स्टेट बैंक इंटरेस्ट रेट्स जैकअप करता है और उनको ऊपर करने से जो कॉस्ट ऑफ बिजनेस है, डूइंग बिजनेस, वो और बढ़ जाती है और उसके بھی implications ہیں ہماری بزنس کے لیے، کیونکہ ایک بڑی اس وقت ٹائٹ صورتحال ہے۔ اب اس سے نکلنے کا راستہ کیا ہے؟ اس سے نکلنے کے دو بڑے صاف راستے ہیں، اور باقی دو مزید 4 چیزیں ہیں کہ جن سے ہم پاکستان کی اکانومی کو اس کرائسس سے نکال سکتے ہیں۔ فرسٹ از ٹیکسیشن، کہ ہم اگر ٹیکس ریونیو نہیں بڑھائیں گے تو ہمارے لیے ممکن نہیں ہے کہ جو ہماری لائبلٹیز ہیں ان کو ہم ادا کر سکیں، وگرنہ ہمیں ان کے لیے ادھار لینے پڑیں گے۔ ہمارا ٹیکس ٹو GDP is amongst the lowest. By 2018 we had gone up to 11.5%, but unfortunately in past 4 years we again dropped to somewhere 9.5 or 10% کے قریب نیچے آ گئے ہیں۔ تو اب ہمیں اپنے ٹیکس ٹو GDP ریشیو کو بڑھانا ہے، اور کم از کم 16 سے 18% تک لے کر جانا ہوگا تاکہ ہم اپنے اخراجات کو سسٹین کر سکیں۔ اب ہماری بدقسمتی یہ ہے کہ جو چاہے ٹیکسیشن ہے چاہے وہ سرکولر ڈیٹ ہے، ہم اپنی خسارے کو پورا کرنے کے لیے لیکیجز پہ غور نہیں کرتے۔ ہم جو نیٹ سے باہر لوگ ہیں ان کو نیٹ میں لانے پہ غور نہیں کرتے، جو ہماری چھری کے نیچے لوگ ہیں انہیں کو ہم اور ذبح کرتے ہیں۔ تو لہذا we keep overtaxing those who are already paying taxes. We keep increasing the tariff for those who are already paying electricity bills, and we don't go after those جہاں پہ کہ بجلی چوری ہو رہی ہے یا جہاں پہ لیکیجز ہو رہی ہیں سسٹم کی، because those are hard choices, those are choices کہ جس کے لیے ذرا پولیٹیکل ول کی بھی ضرورت ہوتی ہے۔ اب ہم کوشش کر رہے ہیں کہ اس چیز کو ایکسپینڈ کریں، اور rather کہ ہم taxing the already taxed or increasing tariff for already paying people, we should go after those segments کہ جہاں پہ theft ہے یا جہاں پہ لوگ سسٹم سے باہر اسکیپ کر رہے ہیں ٹیکس کو۔ تو یہ ایک بہت بڑا چیلنج ہے، اور پاکستان میں جو انفارچونیٹلی SME سیکٹر ہے، اس کی جو ہمارے ٹریڈرز ہیں اور یہ پورا سیکٹر ہے، اس میں بہت پوٹینشیل ہے ٹو پے ٹیکسز آلسو، اور ان میں ٹیکس کی پیمنٹ کے حوالے سے کافی ہچکچاہٹ بھی ہے۔ تو آئی تھنک ون بگ چیلنج ان دس سیکٹر از کہ ہاؤ ٹو میک دا ٹیکسیشن سسٹم مور فرینڈلی اینڈ آلسو ٹو برنگ دیم انٹو دا نیٹ۔ سو دس از آئی تھنک ون بگ چیلنج فار پاکستان اگر if we have to increase our tax revenues. Second important thing for Pakistan is کہ how fast do we grow our exports. چونکہ ہم جب بھی تھوڑا سا ہیٹ اپ ہوتے ہیں گروتھ کی طرف تو ہماری propensity to consume بڑھتی ہے، ڈالرز کی امپورٹ بڑھتی ہے، but our capacity to earn dollars does not increase. So we land in this deficit zone, current account deficit, and then we have to apply emergency brakes. امپورٹس کٹ کرتے ہیں، اکانومی کو پھر سلو ڈاؤن کرتے ہیں، اس کو ٹھنڈا کرتے ہیں، اور پھر ہم سلو موڈ میں آ جاتے ہیں۔ تو یہ سائیکل بریک کرنے کا ایک ہی طریقہ ہے کہ ہم سسٹینیبل بیسس پہ فاسٹ ٹریک ذریعے سے اپنی ایکسپورٹس کو بڑھائیں، which is the only way that has been followed by all countries from Japan to India and China and every other country, Malaysia, Taiwan, Singapore, جس نے بھی کیا ہے کوریا۔ تو ہم نے انفارچونیٹلی ایکسپورٹ لیڈ گروتھ کو نہیں فالو کیا، اور نہ ہی ہمارا بگ بزنس نہ ہی ہمارا SME سیکٹر۔ میں کورین پروفیسر سے ابھی ملا لندن میں، تو اس نے یہ بتایا کہ جب ہم نے ترقی شروع کی تو امریکہ میں اس زمانے میں وگز کا بڑا خواتین میں شوق پیدا ہوا، تو اس نے کہا گھر گھر کورین خواتین نے وگ بنانے کی فیکٹری کھول لی، اور ہم نے امریکہ کو جو ہے یہ وگز ایکسپورٹ کرنا شروع کر دی۔ دس از جسٹ ون اسٹوری کہ کس طریقے سے ہم نے ایک ایکسپورٹ کلچر ملک کے اندر ڈیولپ کیا کہ ہر کورین جو ہے وہ ایکسپورٹ فوکسڈ ہو گیا۔ کسی کا کارخانہ تھا، کسی کے گھر میں چھوٹی بزنس تھی، ایوری ون تھاٹ کہ ہمارا بگ چیلنج یہ ہے کہ ہم نے ڈالرز کیسے کمانے ہیں۔ تو ہمارا انفارچونیٹلی ایک بڑا ڈومیسٹک مارکیٹ پہ جو امپورٹ سبسٹیٹیوشن کا ہم نے فارمولا کہیں سیکھ لیا تھا، اس میں ہم نے ایسی پروٹیکشن کمفرٹ زون بنا دیا कि big business, small business, medium business, everyone is very happy to just stay inside the country and that's it. अभी मैं आपको बताऊं कि SME तो आप छोड़िए, हमने अभी देखा कि पाकिस्तान की स्टॉक एक्सचेंज में 530 कंपनियां लिस्टेड हैं. उन 530 कंपनियों में सिर्फ 74 कंपनीज हैं which have $10,000 plus export. अगर आप वो 1 मिलियन करें तो शायद 10-12 ही रह जाएं. तो ये पाकिस्तान का जो बिग बिजनेस है, अब ये एंग्रो है, फौजी फाउंडेशन, ये फौजी वाले हैं, या और जो बड़े बड़े हमारे ग्रुप्स हैं, इनसे अगर आप पूछें इनकी बैलेंस शीट पे कितने बिलियंस ऑफ रुपीस पोस्ट होते हैं, उनमें डॉलर्स कितने हैं? $0. कोई काबिल जिक्र किसी का डॉलर नहीं है. तो हर बिग बिजनेस या SME बिजनेस इज वेरी वेल इंटरेस्टेड इन द लोकल मार्केट. यहाँ पे ही वो समझता है कि उसके लिए रोल है, उसके अलावा दुनिया उसकी खत्म हो जाती है, कराची से आगे नहीं है दुनिया. आई थिंक दिस इज द बिग चैलेंज कि हम किस तरीके से, मैंने पिछले टेन्योर में एक SME SMEDA के जरिए प्रेजेंटेशन दी थी. तो what they told me कि we have a potential to have $40 to $60 billion export from SME sector. I think that is the key कि हम किस तरीके से अपने SME sector को align करें with the new global opportunities. खास तौर पे अब जो digital revolution है, e-commerce है, इसके अंदर तो अब खत्म हो गई है ये बंदिश कि आप फिजिकली किस जगह पर हैं. आप एक गांव के अंदर भी कोई प्रोडक्ट बना रहे हैं तो पूरी दुनिया को आप सर्व कर सकते हैं वहां से. तो ये एक SME को एक्सपोर्ट ड्रिवन करना और उसके जो इंसेंटिव्स हैं उसको उसके मुताबिक अलाइन करना, आई थिंक इज अ बिग चैलेंज फॉर अस. इट इज अ नेशनल नीड. टैक्स रेवेन्यू कैसे लेने हैं, दूसरे ये है कि एक्सपोर्ट कैसे बढ़ानी है, तीसरा ये है कि जो हमारे रेमिटेंस हैं उनको भी हमें बजाय ये कि वो बाहर से पैसा आए और यहाँ पर आके वो कंजम्पशन में ज़ाय हो जाए या सारा रियल एस्टेट के अंदर पार्क हो जाए, हमें ये देखना चाहिए कि जो पाकिस्तान का 29-30 अरब डॉलर सालाना पैसा आता है वो भी ये मिडिल क्लास के लोग होते हैं. हम किस तरह से कोई SME सेक्टर में ऐसी अपॉर्चुनिटीज क्रिएट कर सकें कि जिससे वो रेमिटेंस के पैसे से पाकिस्तान के SME सेक्टर में इन्वेस्टमेंट्स के मौके पैदा हो सकें, क्योंकि इतना बड़ी खातर खा रकम है जो पाकिस्तान में आती है जस्ट फॉर लैक ऑफ ऑप्शंस एंड लैक ऑफ ऑल्टरनेटिव्स. वो पैसा जो है या सिर्फ रियल एस्टेट में पार्क हो जाता है या फिर कंजम्पशन के अंदर चला जाता है. और फाइनली आई थिंक इन्वेस्टमेंट्स हैं, फॉरेन डायरेक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट्स हैं, वो हमें किस तरह इस मुल्क में लानी है. वियतनाम जो है वो दुनिया में हमसे ज़्यादा मुल्क है, 110 मिलियन का, $28 बिलियन सालाना FDI है. हम 220 मिलियन का मुल्क है और $1.5 बिलियन FDI है. तो SME सेक्टर के लिए भी एक बड़ी अपॉर्चुनिटी है कि ये दुनिया में कोलैबोरेशंस तलाश करें और इसमें भी हम फॉरेन इन्वेस्टमेंट्स लाने के लिए किस तरह टैक्स रिजीम्स में इंसेंटिव्स क्रिएट कर सकते हैं. दुनिया में मैच मेकिंग होती है SME सेक्टर्स की. अमेरिका में मुझे याद है कि एक ज़माने में उनका बहुत कामयाब प्रोग्राम था कि जो अमेरिका की SMEs को इजराइल की SMEs के साथ मैच मेकिंग करके कोलैबोरेट कराता था. तो इसी तरह अब चूंकि ग्लोबल सप्लाई चेन्स हैं, हमारे भी SMEs के लिए ज़रूरी है कि वो ग्लोबल सप्लाई चेन्स के साथ खुद को लिंक करें, इंटीग्रेट करें. और ये तभी मुमकिन होगा कि जब हमारा जो टैक्स निज़ाम है वो इस किस्म के लिंकेजेस को इंसेंटिवाइज करे और उनके लिए रास्ता निकाले. तो मेरा ख्याल है कि ये पाकिस्तान का फ्यूचर इज इन SME सेक्टर, नॉट जस्ट फॉर हैविंग मोर टैक्स और मोर एक्सपोर्ट्स, बट मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंटली प्रोवाइडिंग एम्प्लॉयमेंट अपॉर्चुनिटी. कि हमारी जो नौजवान आबादी है उसको हम सरकारी नौकरियों के साथ या बिग बिजनेसेस में, तो अब ऑटोमेशन आएगी, टेक्नोलॉजी आएगी, वहाँ पे जो बिग बिजनेस है उसमें एम्प्लॉयबिलिटी के अपॉर्चुनिटीज विल बी लेस एंड लेस इन द फ्यूचर. बट आई थिंक द मेन ड्राइवर ऑफ एम्प्लॉयमेंट क्रिएशन हैज टू बी द SME सेक्टर, और उसी के जरिए हम अपने लोगों को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा एम्प्लॉयमेंट भी दे सकते हैं. तो ये वो चैलेंजेस हैं जिसके लिए आई थिंक आप जैसे तमाम दानिश्वर हमारी रहनुमाई करें. We have made a 5E framework जिसमें first E, which is the central E, is about exports, enterprises, and employment. So इसका किस तरह से हम इसको strengthen करें? Second E is E-Pakistan and empowering youth through IT. और वो एक और हमारे लिए बड़ी अपॉर्चुनिटी है कि उस सेक्टर को हम कैसे डेवलप करें. Third is environment, जिसमें के water and food security भी शामिल है. और agriculture sector में भी how do we promote SME culture and SME operations जिससे के agriculture goes into value added. Then fourth is energy. How do we have affordable and renewable energy? And fifth, E is equity, which essentially covers education, health, population control in the country. So इस 5E framework का जो सबसे central pillar है वो जैसे मैंने कहा is exports. And for exports, focusing on our enterprises and employment. So I hope with your wisdom, we can really get some good ideas, and I will assure you that whatever recommendations you will give us, हम इंशाल्लाह ताला उनको पूरी तरह implement करेंगे. Thank you.
Thank you so much, S. Iqbal sir. I would now like to invite Meher for the panel discussion. And the rest of the panelists.
Assalamu alaikum ji to all our panelists as well as to Minister Saab, who is still with us. Hassan, just to recap for everyone, can you do a very brief introduction of our panelists?
Yeah, sure. So we have Syed Nabil Hashmi Saab, who is currently the chairperson for the SNH group, and he's also the former chairperson for the, just give me a second, former chairman of Pakistan Auto Parts Manufacturing Association and Pakistan Plastic Manufacturing Association. We have Mariam Sarim, who's the founder and CEO of Insta Energy, a solar power company in Pakistan. We have Asfandiya Farooq Saab, who is Senior Vice Chairman, Chain Store Association of Pakistan. And lastly, we have Asman Malik, who's the CEO of Pakistan Business Council. So these are our panelists. And then we have Meher Shah, Director RMC Karandaaz.
Thank you, Hassan. Assalamu alaikum to all our panelists. We will need to catch up on time, and I am very, very aware that Mr. Ehsan Malik needs to leave quite soon. So, Ehsan Saab, my first question on this panel is going to be to you. I was going to round off our discussion with you, but I think I will begin with you. So my question is that the PBC is an 89-member strong advocacy platform for Pakistan's businesses. As per your website, your members contribute approximately 40% to exports and 11% to Pakistan's GDP. We will be going on a bit of a tangent, but I think it's an important aspect. How does PCB support and include its SME members? In other words, is there a balancing act between the needs of large enterprises and the smaller ones among your members?
Okay, ji, thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Very glad to have you with us again today. I think we last met a few weeks ago, and we talked about nothing but exports on that occasion. So just to correct a few of the figures that you just mentioned, Pakistan Business Council is actually composed of 100 of the largest businesses in the country. They are both multinational as well as large local companies. In addition to contributing a significant amount of exports, it currently stands about 45%. We also represent about 12% of the country's GDP. But more importantly, in the context of today's discussion, we contribute a third of the total taxes that are collected in Pakistan. We are not a sectoral body, although there are, our members belong to about 18 different sectors. They come primarily from manufacturing, but they are also large banks, service companies, and so on. The overarching theme under which we work is something we call Make in Pakistan. And the objective of that is obviously to create jobs, something that the Honorable Minister just mentioned, also to promote export, which is again something that's the priority for Pakistan, but also to reduce reliance on imports in a competitive manner, not through outright protection or indefinite protection. And the other major facet that we work on is formalization of the economy, which is also, in the context of today's discussion. I want to say, the Minister Saab very rightly pointed out that there are twin deficits that are plaguing our economy. There's the external account and there's the fiscal account. I would actually say that there's a third deficit that's also plaguing our economy, and that is to do with trust. Now, this is trust that, unfortunately, and I'm not, pinpointing the current government, but the economic leadership for the last, several governments. The way that the policy and the application of the policy and the implementation of the policy has worked, it has actually been counter, to the promotion of business in general, but particularly formal business. In fact, I would say it is actually promoted informalization, not formalization, which again, is relevant from an SME language, from an SME sort of lens. So when we talk about formalization of the economy at TBC, we don't always obsess ourselves with taxation, although taxation is a very important measure given the low tax to GDP ratio and so on, and the need to broaden the tax base. But the way that informal economy hurts the formal economy and creates an unlevel playing field is beyond taxation. It is in the way that adulteration, for example, works to harm the formal sector. The sale of unsafe products hurts the formal sector. The non-conformance of environmental and social and governance standards also, in the end, ends up costing the formal sector more because they have to then go and make up. Focusing for the time being on exports in particular, and responding to your point about how can the larger businesses help the SMEs. I want to make the point that we are a business advocacy body, so our primary ambit of operation is in articulating policies for the government, and we have done numerous market studies as well as analysis of the trade agreements. But specifically on exports, we've also published a number of studies. In fact, if you go on our website, you'll find about 120 different studies covering all the facets that we've just spoken about. Specifically on exports, one of the, and going back to the taxation, I think one of the major recommendations that we make is that you cannot export taxes out of Pakistan. So when you have a stretched supply chain where a series of manufacturers are adding value and then supplying a piece of, an item to the final exporter, whilst the final exporter is able to wash the taxes that it incurs, it has no ability to go and even know about the taxes that have already been incurred by 1, 2, 3, and sometimes a number of SMEs in that supply chain. Yeah. So I think a way has to be found to wash the export prices of all the taxes that are incurred in the supply chain. The other important suggestion that we've made to the State Bank of Pakistan is that countries like Japan in particular promoted their exports, not necessarily by the SMEs directly exporting, but by developing export houses. So Mitsubishi is, for example, a great example of this, where they are able to do the marketing of the products, but the supplies of the products, they rely upon a number of SMEs. Yeah, and I think that is a very important initiative that can be taken. The third one is that whilst the larger exporters, and I would here criticize the larger exporters, that the larger exporters are very happy to supply USA, to Europe, to UK, the more developed parts of the world, because it is less risky. For SMEs to get into that game, they need to really focus also on Africa and Central Asia, which the larger exporters should also be doing. So getting the Exim Bank of Pakistan operational is very important. because credit insurance, particularly when you supply, whether it's a large exporter or a medium-sized exporter to Africa and Central Asia, is of paramount importance. So developing, I know Exim Bank has been established, but it hasn't been capitalized. It is not operational. I think that needs to happen. Currently, we are facing import crunch. As you know, direct exporters are allowed to import, whatever is required for the exports, to make the goods. Unfortunately, when you have a stretched supply chain, the indirect exporters are not able to do that, and we are in constant dialogue with the State Bank of Pakistan. I know I'm running out of time, so I will just mention 2 or 3 other facets where larger businesses are doing handholding. So as you know, in earlier introduction, it was mentioned that I served about 24-25 years with Unilever. One of the big things that Unilever does, and it's now being emulated across the larger businesses, is to develop suppliers. So, for example, Unilever in Pakistan has never ever made the surf powder, which is one of their main products that they sell. They've always relied upon a medium-sized enterprise to do that. So they have developed the capacity, the technical capacity to do that. Then companies like Unilever and other companies also do trilateral arrangements with their banks. So on the basis of the assurance that the goods are going to be bought by Unilever, the bank extends the credit to the small and medium-sized enterprise, and is assured that the money will come back to them because there is a large customer called Unilever. One of the reasons that I think you should focus on why the State Bank of Pakistan's scheme to promote credit to the SMEs did not work is because the SMEs don't have a clean record before they can come and borrow money. So they've been in the informal sector, now they want to graduate into the formal sector, but they have no records. So they're not able to satisfy the banks. Yeah. So I think this is one of the things, and I think one piece of work that FPR and everybody should do is how do you get these companies to come into the formal sector? What is the welcome plan? Is there, for example, a graduated imposition of taxes? I know amnesty is a bad word, and we do not talk about amnesty. But how can you forget the past and you allow these SMEs to come in? And last but not the least, at the end of the day, your competitiveness, Pakistan's competitiveness, is a function of scale and productivity. Unfortunately, SMEs do not have the scale, right? So we have to develop the supply chains so that they can partner the larger companies. I'll stop at that, Ziad. I hope I've answered some of your questions.
Thank you, Ehsan Saab. That was very thorough. And I think you've given us a very good umbrella to now go granular under. So my next question would be to Mariam. Mariam, you started Insta Energy 3-4 years ago. Prior to that, you were a banker, and you functioned in that career for numerous years. Now, in our run-up to this event, we had a chat on the type of challenges that you face as the CEO of your company, as the founder of your company, and as somebody who is involved in the day-to-day management of your company. So if you could just say a few lines on what Insta Energy is about, and then I think help shine a light on the type of and the range of challenges pertaining to tax specifically that you face.
Okay, thank you, Meher, for having me on the panel. And I must congratulate Karandaaz on publishing of this report. And I have to say that, after our conversation, and especially after going through the report and listening to our, panelists and other people, it's really uplifted me that the challenges or the frustration that I felt while working and setting up the company is generic, actually. It's with all the other SMEs, the same challenges are being faced. And I actually thought that probably, they're unique to me because I was a banker before and I went into business and entrepreneurship. So I need to learn a lot. But I'm amazed at how many people think that the taxation system is so vague and complex to understand that you really cannot get to the bottom of it or get it right. So you would always be relying on a number of advisors, especially your tax consultant, the person who looks after your finances, in order to do this job. And actually, it's difficult for an SME to have one person do the jobs, because as the report highlights, there are 61 times that you need to actually go in and file those reports and the taxes. So yes, one thing that I've always felt at the time of establishing the business also and then running it also is that the tax system is just so complex that it has always been difficult to understand. So that was one where I started off. Secondly, I think we had this discussion before, the fact that all these tax changes are abrupt and ad hoc makes it very difficult for us to maintain our profit margins. So while the profit margins have squeezed, and recently, there has been another jump in sales tax percentages, it is also ad hoc and sometimes post-dated. So while the tax authorities, as well as AEDB, is the Alternate Energy Development Board, which looks after all the renewable energy, they have our communication, contact addresses, emails. We are never notified through a formal channel of what is the effective date that that tax is going to come into place. I can give you an example. About, I think, a year and a half, January last year, a sales tax was imposed on solar business for the very first time. Now, that was a big change. On one hand, the government has constantly been encouraging renewable energy. And on the other hand, there's this imposition of the 17% GST without giving any prior notice. Of course, there was, gossip going on around. You could hear from the grapevine, there is a talk, but there's always been that talk. So, that did happen. And what happened was that because we had already booked in sales, we could not go back to the customer and say that, you now have to pay the GST, because 17% GST on a solar sale is quite a significant number. And the customers were really angry. And this was faced by all the competitors in the solar market. So that fact that it is ad hoc, SMEs, of course, are not consulted, but so are the other solar players who are not consulted. And then secondly, because it just happens all of a sudden and you are not given a cutoff date that from this date onwards, their sales tax would be imposed. It all remains vague. So you cannot really communicate to a customer. A customer would ask you for some evidence of that. You have no formal notification that comes to you as an SME that, this is going to be effective from this date, which we can then share with the customer, bringing in transparency into the whole transaction. And from the transparency, I would like to link it to what Ehsan Saab also mentioned, and what came out in the report also, is the point of distrust. So, while we want to work very closely and very transparently and be very compliant with all the tax body, FBR, everyone concerned, it is difficult to do so because there is mistrust at all levels. And the customer, of course, have the same mistrust in us also. So this was the second point I wanted to talk about. Another point, which is very interesting, I think Shamshad Saiba mentioned in her session, was, when the provincial taxation also comes in. So while we're very happy to launch in Islamabad as a business, when that was successful, we wanted to scale up, go to other cities. And now we have Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, Peshawar. So then now we have to do the same exercise in every province also. Whether we do a sale, whether we don't do a sale, that becomes difficult. Then about fragmentation, there was a question about the fact that, when do we book the sale? If we are getting the receipts from the customer coming in about 3 months from now, The customer says only when, this transaction is completed and I have net metered, only then I'm going to make the full payment. But we've got to make our tax payments much in advance. So all these things make the whole purpose of doing business so frustrating and cumbersome that the actual, the intention of becoming an SME and contributing towards the economy takes a backseat. Your entire model goes around, how can I be more tax efficient? How do I understand this? How do I save myself from taxing? How do I communicate to the customer? Instead of communicating about the growth of the business and the value that we add to the customer's transaction, we're talking about, oh, if you can book your sale like this in advance, and, we hear that there is a taxation change or whatever. So it's more of a firefighting than business growth. So I would really like to see that spectrum change. And, certainly it would be helpful if we get to understand how it is working for an SME. Do we have any incentives? If the policies are changing, do we get an advance notice? Are we notified through a communication link rather than just a blanket change? I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Mariam. That was, yes, very detailed. And I think you've touched on various aspects of, the client end of the business, as well as internally, sort of the management type of issues that you face within the organization. So very comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nabil Saab, for my next question, I will turn to you. Now, in Ali Khizr's presentation, I wonder whether you saw that presentation. In which he showed that the manufacturing sector's contribution to the economy, while significant, was far outstripped by the amount of tax being paid by the manufacturing sector. So, the proportion of tax being paid by the manufacturing industry was greater than the contribution to GDP. Do you think that has played a role for the auto sector? And, how does it affect the SMEs in the auto supply chain?
Yes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you. Actually, when we talk about the auto sector, and for the benefit of the participants and all the viewers, let me just give you a brief of what the auto sector is exactly. And you need to understand that everybody, if one understands, then because everybody now sees the auto sector as a four-wheeler car, which they have at home. But actually, the auto sector is a big umbrella, which encompasses the manufacturing and productions of trucks and buses also, tractors also, motorcycles, and then the cars in which you've got the passenger cars and the commercial vehicles. Now, the issue to understand if the taxation system right now is actually affecting the SMEs, well, my answer is a very simple yes, it does affect. Because the auto sector right now is one of the most heaviest taxed sector in Pakistan, and being one of the most documented also sector, the SMEs, in fact, one of the positive points in the auto sector is that the small and medium and even our tier 1, tier 2 suppliers within the auto sector are also within the documented economy, and they are not out. So the SMEs in the auto sectors are, because they are in the value chain, they are also very well documented. But what happens that they become uncompetitive, because when you've got alternate regimes working, competing with the same sector, it becomes very difficult. I'll give you two examples. For example, an Alto car. In Pakistan, currently, the price is around 2.6 million rupees. And do you know what is the taxation percentage on of this price? It's 38%. So actually, and auto X factory price is 1.6 million with all the new depreciation and with all the new, the inputs and all that, it's 1.6 million. You translate that, that's around 5,000 to 5,400 US dollars. You can't get a vehicle at this price anywhere in the world. So that speaks for the competitiveness. But when the taxation comes in, that really bites. And because the prices go up, it hits the volumes of this particular auto sector. Now come to the SME, the downstream industry in the auto sector. A typical auto parts manufacturer pays 18% sales tax. He's also, since he's in the documented sector, he also pays his corporate taxes. He also pays his the 38 various, provincial taxes and the professional taxes and all for the labor and the social security. So you can just imagine all these big list of taxes which have been paid. But then there's a sales tax also that supplier pays. Similarly, if a trader imports an auto parts from abroad, what he does is he simply gets it cleared from the Karachi port or whatever ports in Pakistan, pays the duty by weight, not by item, by weight. So my example is if a piston in Pakistan is costing, let's say 500 rupees, I am paying 80% sales tax on that, but a trader imports it. First thing, he undervalues it. Number two, the Federal Board of Revenue with all its policies ensures that it gets cleared by weight, not by unit. So the customs duty on a piston, which is technically supposed to be, let's say 200 rupees, ends up being 20 rupees. And once it comes to the retail network in Pakistan, which is the aftermarket, the auto parts aftermarket, which is basically supposed to be with the SME sectors of Pakistan, the auto parts SME sector, we are totally left out because we just can't compete. And then at the retail level, subsequent retail level of the auto parts aftermarkets in Pakistan, there's no retail regime because nobody is paying any sales tax. And nobody's been asked by, our markets are just not been asked by FBR to pay taxes. So how can you, so that is why Khizr's presentation was showing that the percentage of the taxation is extremely high. And we've got loop-sided policies, at least for the auto sector and the auto parts SME sector, where on one side, we are documented, we are paying our taxes, but then there's a huge market of the aftermarket in Pakistan, which is just not accessible to us because of the government policies. And all these aftermarkets in Pakistan, Meher, are being are subsequently supporting all the illegal hawala systems and all the illegal currency systems, and also contributing to a huge CAD deficit which Pakistan is currently facing. So the taxation, one needs to understand Federal Board of Revenue, and I must give credit to what Dr. Shamsad said earlier on, is that you cannot have people who have conflict of interest making policies for themselves. The first thing they will ensure is to make themselves comfortable. So the Federal Board of Revenue over the last decades has ensured policy after policy, making itself so comfortable by introducing withholding tax regimes, which now is somewhere around 90% of the overall taxation collection. And actual 5% is the actual tax, which the slides also show. So you cannot have that. It's a loop-sided system. It has to be corrected. Now, leaving the auto sector aside, I must also emphasize that the other SME sectors, besides, be they in the textile, be they in the surgical, be they in engineering, non-engineering, pharma, or whatever, the downstream, they are exposed to extreme high taxation regime, because on one side, they are paying the withholding taxes which are imposed in their electricity bills, in the fuels, in whatever things which they are buying. But on the second side, the inputs for the SMEs are extremely high also, because whatever they are buying from the markets, the raw materials and whatever, they are also exposed to not only 18% tax, but if I, for example, sell to an unregistered SME, I have to charge extra 3 or 4% even sales tax, and then the withholding tax. And I think that this whole regime is very discriminatory. We say that we want to support the SME sectors, but the taxation system, the policy system is just not supportive of that. Talk about State Bank of Pakistan. Tell me, I think Ehsan just mentioned that they do not have the documentation to support, go to the bank and get financing. I agree with that. But my question is, does State Bank have policies which, for example, support non-collateral based lending? Why not? If you want to support a cottage or SME sector, then non-collateral based policies and non-collateral based lending has to be introduced. Whatever. Otherwise, it's just going to happen.
Ji, Nabil Saab, because you mentioned non-collateral based, I would like to put out there, since we are concentrating on SMEs here, that the State Bank and the SECP have set up a secured transactions registry, and that enables entities to take financing against movable collateral. So a very varied list of items can be used as collateral. It includes things like gold, like intellectual rights, IP rights, even things like, school owners have utilized school furniture as collateral and borrowed against that. So the STR, the Secured Transactions Registry, is something that I think we definitely need to talk more about and put out there, because that is something which will enable SMEs to shift away from fixed collateral like property and real estate. So
one needs to see, yeah, thank you, Meher, but one needs to see how much it has actually performed. That is the key.
Bilkul,
so put out policies and policies, but the performance has to be seen if it actually has performed. So basically, when I said that non-collateral based lending, my direction was to even the turnover of a typical small cottage or SME industry, and he has a bank account, and anybody at the bank can see his transactions over a year or 2 years, how much turnover he has, and he should be given adequate finance accordingly to increase his business. That doesn't happen in Pakistan. And everybody is, the FBR itself wants to be secure. They don't want to work, and they want revenue collection. The banks also want to be very secure. They don't actually want to, work and ensure. And the policies right now are as such that everybody is in the comfort zone, and our, unfortunately, country is really suffering. And we all need to be very open to newer policies and new innovative lending policies. Thank you.
Of course. Achaji, Asfandyar, thank you for being so patient. We started very late, and I have really reserved the question for you right to the end. As you were introduced, you were one of the founders of the Chain Store Association of Pakistan, which is the largest association of entities involved in e-commerce. Please correct me if I do not have the full picture on the Chain Store Association of Pakistan here. But with regards to retail, Pakistan is, a lot of people describe Pakistan now as a trading economy. They say we're no longer a manufacturing economy. So, how valid do you think that statement is? And have our tax policies contributed to this shift towards trading?
Thank you, Meher, and thank you, everybody. Just to sort of correct you and just to explain sort of what the Chain Store Association of Pakistan does. I myself, just to I run a medium-sized enterprise in the retail e-commerce space, and the Chain Store Association of Pakistan is a newer official body, but it's an official trade body. Organized retail. So organized retail is all these sort of established brands that you see, whether they are physical stores or online stores, but primarily in physical retail space. And they're SMEs as well as mostly SMEs and some large enterprises as well. And all of the organized retailers are actually also classified as tier 1 retailers by the FBR. And as such, they are integrated with the FBR through their POS integration system, where there's real-time integration in terms of the sales side of the business. So they are digitalized actually, and I would say one of the few sectors or only sectors or segments of the retail sector that are digitalized and reporting quite transparently on the demand side and trying to obviously document and I think the FBR's approach has been to sort of document the retail trade, starting with the organized retail sectors, and then moving, trying to broaden it as well as also deepen it by documenting the value chain, be it manufacturing and distribution and so on. So that's the context. So I'll talk basically, as you mentioned, the trading economy. So retail and wholesale trade in Pakistan is largely, unfortunately, undocumented. I mean, it's about almost 20% of the GDP and a large contributor in terms of the GDP. But in terms of documentation, it's a long way to go. And I think when we talk about that, I mean, even organized retail is around 10 to 15% of retail trade, which has grown pretty fast over the last decade, but it's still a smaller chunk of overall retail and wholesale trade in Pakistan. And I think we have talked there is more and more talk about the contribution or the lack thereof in taxes of the retail and wholesale trade in Pakistan, which is definitely a problem. Now, that being said, the organized retail trade is in the formal space, right? So in the formal space, we see that difference, which we saw in the slides. And others have also talked about it, Ehsan Sahab as well, about the formal sector and how much burden it carries. Now, in the retail trade, what we see the formal businesses, and that's why we don't see the formal space growing as much, is because there's a very lopsided sort of tax burden. Businesses that in the organized retail space are paying of their turnover approximately 20 to 25% in taxes, whether it's GST, whether it's income tax, minimum tax, also bearing withholding taxes of sort of people in the supply chain. And on the other side, we have traders or very micro and small retailers, and some sort of presenting themselves as small retailers who are have an effective tax of maybe 2-3% or slightly higher. But the disparity is enormous when you look at this compared to the formal and informal space. Now, as far as your question regarding moving into the sort of being characterized as a trading economy, I think one of the reasons for that is also because the growth in domestic demand of goods over the last decade has really grown. And maybe we have seen, and I think we have seen also, is where manufacturing is being replaced by imported goods, and primarily through imported goods in the in the gray space, in the informal space. So you have now a lot of imported goods coming in under invoice, smuggled, and so on. Whether it's, as was being mentioned, about auto parts and other goods, there's a wide variety of goods in this space. So what's happening is that they are more competitive because they are not being taxed properly. And I think it's not just a policy issue; it's an enforcement issue. At the customs side, within the whole tax machinery, we are seeing that this is growing, and that is a big, I think, problem for manufacturing and industrialization in our economy. And that's why we are also seeing a big shift towards trading of these goods, as well as then investment accordingly in other sectors, which have weak tax regimes, like it's encouraging informality such as real estate, agriculture, and of course the services sector, of which retail is the biggest. Retail and wholesale trade is the biggest part of the service sector in the economy. So that's one reality. And I just want to sort of moving towards sort of why I think we see this is happening is that one, we see this whole withholding tax regime, we see other taxes that are being applied, and this prior to 2018, this was not that big an issue. I mean, for organized retailers, that there wasn't that big disparity between 20-25% and 2-3%. It was more accommodative, the tax regime, and that's when the real growth happened in this space. And now we're seeing more growth happening in the informal space, which is because of higher tax rates, as well as I think one of the reasons why people have gone towards trading and informal undocumented trade is because when we see what the formal sector is going through in terms of the high tax burden, in terms of over aggressive, I would say, mindset of the tax authorities in terms of harassment, in terms of compliances, a difficult tax code, which has also already been mentioned in the report. So all these issues also make a big issue. And of course, when you don't have predictability of the tax policy, if you don't have, for example, 5-year roadmap, how are we going to graduate businesses or how are we going to bring them into the tax, especially retail businesses, then they fight tooth and nail to stay out of the tax net, and of course are facilitated often by bad apples within the tax authorities who are sort of colluding with or taking advantage of the situation. So I think that's one of the reasons why we see this space growing in Pakistan. The trust issue, predictability of policy, the tax culture, and seeing a lot of businesses see what is going on with the current taxpayers. So then they prefer to stay out as long as they can because that's easier for them. I mean, we were talking about tax rates being changing and ad hoc changes. The fact is that for the informal sector, tax rate changes and ad hoc changes don't really affect them. So if they don't affect them, then they are better off operating in that space, whether retail or otherwise. So I think this is a major factor. And then finally, I would say that if there's we need a real sincere consultation and collaboration with, trade bodies, with all sector representatives to find workable solutions that are practical, and can actually broaden, formalize businesses, and then bring them into the then their tax contribution can increase over time. Because when you formalize, obviously, then you have access to financing and all the other benefits. But we need to show those benefits and also set good examples of tax-paying businesses, especially SMEs, so that they may scale rather than try to stay under the radar in the retail space, trading space or cyberspace.
Asfar, you've already touched upon, sort of another question, which I'm sure is a burning question for a lot of people in the audience. Every time there's conversation on taxing traders, there's a deadlock, between government and traders, and you already have kind of gone into providing the answer. But is there anything you'd like to add? How can we get past this deadlock? And how can we make it a win-win for both sides?
To understand the problem, I mean, there are issues that are, other than the fact that if someone is fighting tooth and nail not to come into the tax net, I think we need to figure out what are the practical issues. For example, if you have as I mentioned, if you have an undocumented supply chain and you have an influx of goods which are not documented, so how will any retailer or business easily comply with the procedures in order to bring not bear extra burden or even significant penalties and other issues in terms of compliance. So we need to understand that. Secondly, the rates are also very rates in the policy. I mean, the procedures are very cumbersome. I mean, we've seen how many tax returns need to be filed. We see how many documentation is required, how much withholding taxes also create a big problem. I'll give you a small example. That when recently in 2021, I think it was when a new sort of lower tax was implemented for FMCG goods, which is obviously a big chunk of retail trade, for the fast moving consumer space. So we saw that there was a 0.25% withholding tax, which is not high compared to 4.5 or higher rate, and we saw a same minimum tax rate, which meant that then any this small amount that was being deducted, and this is of course a low margin business, high volume. So you saw that a small amount of was being deducted by a buyer of the good, and that was being offset against the minimum tax liability of the supplier. So these kind of things, I think we need to find more solutions and not just try to paint the entire retail trade with one brush, because being 20% of the economy, we need to look at the subsectoral issues, talk to traders, figure out where the friction lies, where there are challenges, and of course, look forward rather than looking back in terms of, what are your last 5 years or 6 tax records, and we're going to open audits for every year in the past, rather than looking forward and trying to bring them into the tax net in such a way. And I understand there are challenges in terms of the IMF and other issues which sort of hamstrung the tax policy, but I think a lot of the issues have been discussed here. So I think consultation, sincere consultation and collaboration, I think with representatives and the sector and businesses, I think is the way forward, because there's so many details involved. which I think everybody has touched upon. Thank you.
बिल्कुल ठीक है जी. With that, Asfandyar and Nabil Saab, Mariam, I would like to thank our panelists for panel number 1. I would have loved to continue the conversation, but I'm afraid we have questions. I will thank our panelists. Hassan, over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for this insightful discussion, and thank you for bearing with us. And now I would like to invite panel number 2 to join us, which is titled Policy Measures to Ease or Improve SME Tax Collection. The panel will be moderated by Dr. Musharraf Rasool, who is member NFC Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Dr. Rasool has wide-ranging experience in implementation of public sector programs in Pakistan and other countries, assuming leadership roles from early age and managing multiple agencies under his control. He has provided technical assistance to World Bank, ADB, UNDP, USAID, and other international organizations. We have Dr. Hamid Atiq Sarwar, who is tax lead, revenue mobilization, investment and trade remit project at CDO. He is a tax expert and a strategic revenue mobilization advisor. He's a skilled negotiator on policy and finance, leading on policy interventions. And then we have Mr. Mohammad Raza, who is a partner in the Taxation Services Department of A.F. Ferguson and Company since July 2011. He has extensive post-qualification experience of around 22 years of tax consultancy, advisory, and appellate services to various national and multinational clients. Then we have Mr. Zainul Abidin Sahi, who is currently chairman of the Punjab Revenue Authority, who has extensive knowledge of the public sector, having worked as member policy PRA, member operations PRA, and chief information technology FBR. He is also part of the team that developed and launched IRIS, the automated system currently being used in FBR for all business processes. Then we have Mr. Akbar Ali, who is a distinguished fellow chartered accountant and a tech enthusiast with a passion for developing tech-enabled financial solutions. He co-founded BFire and Investomate to revolutionizing the finance sector in Pakistan. Then we have Mr. Tariq Naseem, who is currently serving as the head of Islamic Finance Department and Registrar Mudarba at SECP. And then lastly, we have Daraksha Sheikh, who has over 25 years of experience in legal advisory and commercial consultancy services, spanning across a wide range of practice areas. And she is also currently on the board of directors of SME Leasing Limited and CEO of Sohan Valley Tech, a fintech B2B startup. And with that, I would like to ask Mr. Musharraf to discussion.
Thank you, Hassan. I think this is a very important topic, and we have a panel of distinguished practitioners and experts, and I trust that we'll have a very valuable discussion on the report. So just to launch into the discussion, I would invite Mr. Raza, Mohammad Raza, partner AF Ferguson and Company, and present him with a question to basically talk about certain issues in here. The report findings show that there is a heavy cost involved in compliance due to complicated tax code, ad hoc tax measures, complicated refund processes, onerous filing,
Raza, can you hear us? Are you with us right now? And I asked the other panelists to please turn on your cameras as well so that we can see you guys.
Can you hear me?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure, Jay. So the question is that the report findings show that there is a heavy cost involved in compliance due to complicated tax code, ad hoc tax measures, complicated refund processes, onerous filing, lack of harmonization among jurisdictions as some of the reasons. What are the biggest challenges faced by your small business clients, and how can they be tackled such that both compliance and tax revenue are increased as a result? Over to you, Mohammad Raza Saab.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the answer to your question lies in your question itself, because you have already identified the issues But to start with, I think when we talk about compliance issues for the small and medium entities, without going into the detail as to what entities qualify as an SME, but I think the most important thing is that we have, because of post 18th Amendment, there are now multiple tax jurisdictions. And there is a lack of harmonization amongst those jurisdictions. I think just like one of the panelists in the last panel mentioned, that the moment you want to expand beyond one province, and if incidentally you are being taxed as a service provider under all of those provinces, your tax compliance immediately increases. So for a new startup or for a new business, it becomes a bit difficult, first of all, to prepare a feasibility that what are the tax costs. It would have been very simple if it is just a net profit tax based on his profit. He can estimate that, okay, I will be paying this X amount of tax, and this would be the return to me as an owner or as a shareholder in that business. But the moment they start the business and there are multiple taxes involved on each of the transaction with a bit of complexity. I'm just quoting one example that a lot has been already said about withholding taxes. Within withholding taxes, as a payer or as a withholding agent, at times it becomes difficult for a withholding agent to even determine the correct classification of a payment. There is a very fine line that when a transaction qualifies as a sale of goods, when it becomes execution of a contract, there are different rates for individuals, there are different rates for corporate, then there are different rates for filer, non-filers, and there has been a tendency in our society that these taxes are added as a transaction cost. So the moment you are dealing with a documented person in a transaction, the cost of this tax becomes so high that at times, I think somebody else also mentioned in the last panel, it becomes more attractive to them to remain in the undocumented sector. One can obviously talk about the morality and legality of those people who remain in the informal sector, but this is a reality that because of so much high tax cost in terms of the transactions and then subsequently in terms of compliances, I think the report very boldly mentioned that there are almost more than 60 compliances per annum required for a business with regard to filing and payment of taxes and then reporting, and then subsequently going through the rigors of tax audit, multiple tax audits, and obviously FBR has to do their own job. They have to ensure that tax payers are complying with their laws. So they have to select people for their tax audit, and there are occasions when people are not complying with their obligations. So they are in their own way right to do so. But I think the most important thing is the complexity of laws, that for a new small business, it becomes very difficult. And I think I mentioned somewhere else as well on a lighter note that due to the complexity of laws in taxes, the only business which is flourishing is of the accountants and tax lawyers, because everybody has to come to us to ask the relevant questions on transactions on the business side. And then because of the constantly changing tax laws and policies, they are in a fix. So these are the main issues. I think a lot has already been said. It's just a repetition of what has already been mentioned in the report. But I think more or less these are the issues which are faced by every taxpayer who is in the documented sector and who comes or opts to be in the tax net.
Thank you. I think that is very valuable. I mean, I understand, as you said, I would echo that sentiment that the report does do a good job in bringing out these issues. But still, I think hearing firsthand some of the issues that your clients faced is very valuable. So moving on forward from this, I think this sets out one of the key issues from the taxpayer side, that there are complexities brought in the tax system through legal provisions and multiple jurisdictions. In modern times, in all tax administrations, technology sometimes offers a solution, not the complete solution to deal with some of that. So let's move on to Mr. Akbar Tijani, if I could. Mr. Tijani, you launched BeFiler to make tax filing a simpler process for individuals and businesses by providing a digital app. Can you tell us a little bit about your platform, number of clients, how much total transactions or total volume of taxation goes through that? What is the cost to clients? And what sort of problems are you solving for small businesses? In particular, if let's say your app has reduced compliance costs, reduced the time of service, and given the minute details involved in tax laws, coupled with frequent and ad hoc revisions to tax policies, what are some of the challenges that BeFiler faces? Over to you, Mr. Tijani.
Thank you very much. Yes, so a little bit about BeFiler. So we launched BeFiler in 2018 as a digital alternate to conventional tax filing services by professional lawyers and tax firms. And it's been a very difficult journey from a fintech standpoint because unlike other services which are generally required by users on a frequent basis, it's a one-time thing, and people are not really keen to file tax returns or be tax compliant. So all said and done, since then we've been able to, through our digital marketing and various partnerships, we successfully managed to have over 1 million downloads of our mobile app so far, with over 500,000 registered users, which actually use our services and use our app for various, information and advice. And of them, we've been able to, have users who, eventually use our services for actually tax filing through BeFiler, because with BeFiler's app, you can easily calculate and prepare your tax return. But in the end, if you want BeFiler's team to file your return as well, then of course they can pay a small fee of 2,650 rupees for the tax filing needs. This is applicable to both individuals who are salaried or for those small and medium enterprises who operate in the form of AOP or sole proprietor. So for a small fee of 2,650, we provide a very user-friendly and simple platform which allows user to answer questions which are asked in a layman's term for them to provide the information and be done with their tax filing needs. And as I said, the cost is only 2,650 rupees, but in that we BeFiler as a leading financial app in Pakistan is also up for promoting financial inclusion and promoting other financial services. So within this, we also provide a medical insurance coverage of 500,000 rupees, just to make sure that clients are not only well versed with the compliance, but they are also looked after. Regarding the turnaround time, it takes usually 2 to 3 days for us to complete the services. In season, it gets more difficult when we have more clients. But we have, alhamdulillah, 25,000 paying customers who come to us, and this is very significant if you compare it to a conventional firm which files anywhere around 500 to 1,000 returns in a year. So that's a huge number. Within this, we have almost 50 to 60% salaried individuals and 10 to 15% SMEs. Reason being, salaried individuals are already pay tax in the form of advanced taxes deducted by the employer, but SMEs are generally didn't pay any taxes. And since tax is already deducted, they try not to do any compliance unless they are dealing with a vendor or a customer who wants their ATL or they're subject to additional taxes. Coming to the problems. So typically, if you look at the conventional models, without blaming the tax experts on board, typically, SMEs who don't have a lot of budget to pay for tax compliances, it's a very cumbersome process to find a decent lawyer who is willing to file their return at a fee that they can afford. They have to, visit their offices multiple times, take all their data, and typically they have little or no financial or tax knowledge about the laws and everything. So they have to largely rely on tax consultants' knowledge to guide them and take them through, which in turn also becomes a hassle for consultant as well, because they have to spend a lot of time, for which of course they have to charge fee. And then, as I said, for an SME, it gets difficult to get a service for a fee that they can afford. So fee is always an important consideration. And if they go to a lawyer which is not well versed or professionally qualified to handle their cases, then they face the consequences in the form of notices and penalties. So that is something that typically an SME or individual tax filer faces. BFiler as an online app, tries to address some of the challenges by saving time, because they can do. An individual or business can file their tax return on their own sweet time whenever they have the information available to them. So the app is available anytime, whenever they want to do it, in the night or in the day. It's very economical as well, and the software that we have developed has all the calculations built in, so they don't have to rely on a professional service provider. It automatically takes care of the calculation part. And along the way, when the user is going through the app, it asks questions in a layman manner. And again, as a result, when you enter the information, it automatically updates the tax calculation, which somehow educates and gives some awareness to the clients or the users in terms of, the implications of their information that they enter. For example, if you enter that you earn such amount of income, it will automatically calculate the tax impact. And for example, if you enter the details of any tax deductions in terms of, advanced tax source or tax credits, for example, you donated some amount to someone, to a registered charitable organization, it will automatically show you the tax credits. So the idea is, along the way, it asks questions that gives an idea to the tax filer about various tax laws, and if he is not aware of many withholding taxes that he has already paid. For example, if you travel through airline, you're subject to certain advanced taxes. You used to pay taxes on school fees. So all these taxes are available for adjustment against your liabilities. These things are automatically taken care of. And as the user is answering these questions, he also learns few things while he is doing it. Specifically for SMEs, if you talk about SMEs, the best thing about the digital app is that, for small businesses, it's very difficult for them, for businesses or business owners, to be familiar with all tax laws and regulations. So this app takes care of all the, the knowledge part, and they just have to provide the information and not worry about the information of the tax laws. Similarly, we also offer an expense tracking module and an Asan Hisab app, which is an accounting app for SMEs to, free of costs, sort of service to them, to use this module for keeping a track of their expenses and income, so that at the end of the year, they don't have to do the entire work. They can simply take out the details from these modules and provide their information, financial information about the income and the expenses that the businesses transacted during the year.
Mr. Tijani, thank you so much. These are, I think, wonderful solutions that I think your BFiler is offering. And I think they address one of the problems at the heart of, I think, the taxation systems in Pakistan and many other countries, that how do you reduce compliance costs? And like you've described, I mean, if much of that information that otherwise they'll be seeking out is already embedded in the app, and app basically through some kind of a process leads them to the answers to the tax calculation, that of course reduces compliance costs. And the other objective that we are also trying to focus on in this session is to enhance voluntary compliance and lead to higher revenues for the government. So I think this is a great solution. So if I could then now start looking at, let's see, the tax administration side. We have two esteemed panelists, Dr. Hamid Sarwar and Mr. Zainul Abidin Sahi. So if I could direct the next question to Mr. Hamid Sarwar. Dr. Sarwar, I've had the privilege, I think, at looking at some of the work that you were leading in FBR a few years back as member tax policy. And in what Mr. Tijani has said, has suggested, has hinted at the complexity of the tax code. And of course, we understand tax code is complex. And if I could narrate on a lighter note, there is, they say that sometimes somebody asked Mr. Albert L. Einstein that you are such a genius and you have solved so much of math, you know so much of mathematics. Have you found anything that you have never understood? And he said, yes, the IRS tax code. So, I mean, we know the tax codes all over the world are complex. So sometimes when, let's say, we talk about FBR reforms, there is always this consistent, I should say, appeal to simplify the tax returns. And moving on from Mr. Tijani, tax returns could be simplified, but I trust up to a point only, because if you oversimplify the tax returns, then as tax administration, the sort of data that you would require would of course start diminishing, and the value of tax return to the tax collector diminishes. So in that context, I understand that prior to your current assignment with REMIT, you have had experience with FBR. So my question is, could you shed some light on why it has been so challenging to implement tax reforms within FBR, particularly those that could, let's say, make tax filing for SMEs easier, could create, let's say, if not create incentives, but minimize the disincentives on formalization of SMEs. And under the REMIT project, what are some of the key reforms being proposed to FBR in that regard? Over to you, Dr. Sarwar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saab. And I've been listening to the whole of the workshop, and very good work done by Karandaaz on the SME business taxation issues. What I believe after 30 years of experience in taxation is that the taxation is not a binding constraint to the SME sector or any business. It is at best a nuisance, annoyance. And somehow, when we rightly pointed out, when we look at the parallel systems in India, in US, or in any other country, the income tax, sales tax, and every other tax is there are huge compliance and complexity issues. But nevertheless, FBR has been doing a lot to make the life of people easier. When I was serving in industries, we came up last year with the SME policy, and in SME policy, we created this tax incentive of up to 250 million sort of threshold till which the normal tax laws will not apply, although the demand was till 800 million. The problem with creating thresholds and the special regimes is that everybody then, when there is a shelter, the larger companies also break up into small fragments and come under that shelter, and the whole of the taxation system becomes under a threat. So it's not generally advisable to create islands or special regimes for some people in order to give them some tax relief, because once relief is given, the FBR cannot actually control who comes in to the regime or not, especially looking at the size of informality we do have. But nonetheless, this nuisance and annoyance can be reduced. We have a very nonsense type of withholding tax regime, which we are carrying from 1991. Somehow, we thought it easier to tax people in that way. Withholding is prevalent all over the world, but it is only levied on the incomes or close proxies of income, which is salary, dividend, interest, non-residents. But to the extent we have taken it to imports and to the contracts and to the sale of goods is not something which can be called as proxy of income. But nevertheless, we have huge dependence on it. And despite best of my efforts at the 2 or 3 budgets that I presented or prepared, we could only get rid of only 20 withholding taxes, and now under the IMF program, we are back increasing those taxes. But nevertheless, in the long run, those withholding taxes have to go. And the good thing about withholding taxes and the value-added taxes, sales tax, not only of the provinces, of the federation, is that once we go into digital invoicing, there is no need of filing of return. So the FBR is working on this, that there should be a real-time digital invoicing by all, and the return will be self-prepared. And similar will be the case with income tax return. We think that now the technology usage level has reached that stage where next year FBR can actually give you a pre-filled return to most of the businesses, or at least give them most of the transactions they have done during the year and the taxes they have deposited. And that will make life of the SMEs as well as the large businesses easier. But nevertheless, we should understand that somehow with provinces and with federation, the number of taxes are on the rise, and they need to be, as in any, like Germany has one local tax office which collects 34 taxes. So why can't Pakistan have an institution where we have now about, I think, 12 or 13 provincial departments, and similarly 12 or 13 federal departments collecting different amount of different taxes, EOBI, social security, labor taxes, provincial excises, movable property, urban movable, so many taxes. Why can't these functions be given to one central or provincial organization, which can actually, the policy should remain with the governments, but collection is a very, very mechanical procedure. And why can't this collection be given to, and the EOBI and such taxes may be calculated as percentage of income tax, maybe 0.1% of income tax or sale tax. So things can be made easier for people through policy, but somehow we stick to our past traditions too closely and are afraid of change. That is why things do not move in the right direction.
So thank you so much, Dr. Sarwar. I think on that very note, we can move toward Mr. Zainul Abidin Sahi, who heads the Punjab Revenue Authority. And as you have aptly concluded, I think in your remarks, that one of the key challenges is the complexities of harmonization between different levels of government, between the tax authorities. And not only that we have one tax authority at the federal level, but we have more than one at each of the provincial level. There's the Board of Revenue, and then there's the Provincial Revenue Authority with each province's name in it. And of course, we have the Excise and Taxation Department as well. So with that background, we also understand that in Pakistan, it's a federation, and after the 18th Amendment, provinces are now assigned major expenditure responsibilities, especially in the areas of service delivery, education, health, roads, and others. And therefore, there is a requirement to raise revenue at the provincial level. So my question to you, Mr. Sahi, is that what is the province of Punjab aiming to do to enhance provincial revenue? And within that, then the taxes on the services sector, of course, fall in the purview of your particular agency, if I could call that. And as a chairperson of the PRA, how could you describe the PRA, Punjab Revenue Authority, efforts at facilitating the services sector, especially the SMEs? And to conclude this question and refer back to Dr. Sarwar's point about the complexities, like he's referring there are cases in the world where federal countries have just a single tax authority, and the Russian Federation comes to my mind readily, where all the local oblast and the federal Russian taxes are collected by one tax agency. But I know we are not there. But short of that, the complexities between federal and provincial taxes, which could be a major burden, compliance burden on the SMEs in particular, how can interjurisdictional complexities be overcome in your view? So over to you, Mr. Sahi.
Thank you very much for very, very elaborate questions. So I will have to cover almost all aspects of the issue here. So in trying to just structure my answer a little better so that it can be easier to understand, I've been a part of this webinar for a good hour and a half now. I've listened to the earlier panel as well. And I've seen that there are three basic areas where complexities have been mentioned and discussed. One of those areas is the policy level thing. So I will start with talking about this, the sales tax on services being collected in Punjab and the policies. The words I heard were retrospectivity in taxes, complexity in laws, sudden changes. So I just need to briefly mention that at least in the past 4 years, we have not imposed any new taxes on any service here. So that's one thing. Second, we have, I don't think ever, but at least not in the past 4 or 5 years, we have not made any law with a retrospective effect. So any law which is made starts from that day. And whenever we've done that with maximum possible stakeholder involvement, always keeping the businesses, the chambers, the bars in the loop and taking feedback from them before going on to change a law when we want to. And when you talk about changing a law which increases the burden of taxation on a certain sector, we have not had any such law in the past 4 years. In fact, all our laws have been in the opposite direction. Because you see, these revenue authorities are pretty new, just a decade old, and cannot be compared with the Federal Board of Revenue, which is a huge organization, huge amounts of revenue, large number of taxpayers. So we've in Punjab focused on awareness and education and facilitation primarily, and trying to make the taxpayer compliant and trying to make compliance attractive to the taxpayer before we move on. The second issue was the enforcement issues in this authority. So what we've done here is that, one, there is a complete open door policy, which is why we can easily collaborate. We don't really wait for the stakeholders to ask us, or we don't go after them, asking them for meetings. We just have people walk into the chairman's office or the member's office and just tell us their concerns, and we try to resolve them. We do not, another thing what we've done is we've tried to make sure the cost of compliance is, if not really minimal, it's at least less than the cost of non-compliance. So we've stopped all kinds of coercive action on compliant taxpayers. And by compliant taxpayers, we mean a person who is registered with us and is filing a return, so that he's a compliant taxpayer for us. We have minimum to no audits. And then we've had about 500 plus workshops training about 10,000 plus taxpayers. And a lot of people who come to us, and we understand that their problem lies in the lack of understanding of the tax code. So we invite them for a workshop and give them a couple of days of training, and the results have been excellent. On the policy side, we've actually reduced the rates of half the services that are taxable in Punjab from 16 to 5%. We've stopped all kinds of coercive actions, and the result is that from a revenue of 94 billion 4 years ago, we are now targeting about 200 billion this year. So it has been a very good experience that facilitation actually works in favor of increasing revenue. And we've increased this revenue purely by taking actions which facilitate taxpayers. But when we come to the core point of harmonization, the first issue is that, when you're talking about harmonization, it's not something that the Punjab Revenue Authority or the Punjab government can do on its own. So it has to involve a lot of other organizations, and all of them have to agree to that harmonization process before it can move forward. So we've taken huge strides recently, ever since the National Tax Council was formed about a couple of years ago at the level of the Ministry of Finance, federal government. For instance, there was a huge problem there was a controversy on whether a thing has to be characterized as a good or as a service. We have resolved that issue. It has been resolved in the law, and there is no such confusion as far as I know anymore. Then there was a problem about different provinces taxing services in different manners. Some provinces taxing on the basis of the origin of service, others on the destination of service. That issue has also been resolved recently, and we're going to have a meeting tomorrow in trying to formalize that legislation. So that will also be resolved. So I personally feel that in a matter of 2 years, resolving these two jurisdictional overlaps has been a huge success. Also, tomorrow in the meeting that we're going to have in Islamabad, we're going to discuss the way forward for a single return. I think the issue that has been most discussed here when it comes to complexity is the multiplicity of compliances that you have to file 60 plus returns every year. And mind you, that is just sales tax. The income tax and other returns are separate from that. So we're going to have a detailed meeting on that. We've done a lot of groundwork, and we expect that within the next few months, at least the sales tax returns of the Federal Board of Revenue and the Punjab Revenue Authority will cease to be two. It will be one return for both. And then with the passage of time, the other provinces, we also expect them to join in, and they have committed that they will. So in a very optimistic viewpoint, you can say that maybe by June 24, you would have 12 returns, one for every month rather than 60 that you have right now. The other point that you say that there should be one organization in a province to collect all taxes, that has been the idea that has been given a lot of lip service over the past decade. Unfortunately, there has not been much progress in that, and primarily the reason for that is that these organizations like the Board of Revenue is a pre-colonial organization. It does a lot of other work other than collection of revenue. Then you have the Excise and Taxation Department. So there are a number of complications on how to unite them, what should be the umbrella organization, and stuff like that. And honestly speaking, this is one place where the government needs to start doing something very quickly, because although everyone across the board agrees that it's a good idea, absolutely no progress has been made over the past many years in this. And we could start by eliminating a lot of taxes which do not give us a lot of revenue. And I believe that when you have a cost benefit analysis of any tax, the costs should not be the costs to government are not the only costs that should be considered. The costs to the business, which in consequence then hamper your economy, they should also be considered. And there are about 8 to 10 taxes in the provinces, which in my personal opinion are not cost efficient when you look at the cost to the economy.
Thank you so much. I think this is very valuable. And I think one point that you mentioned, bringing the provincial level tax authorities into perhaps a cohesive whole would be a way forward, certainly. But I mean, even short of that, one area where I think progress could be achieved is when databases across tax agencies and actually other agencies could be linked, could be integrated, so that from that information, tax authorities could generate not only data for their tax policies, but also use that for tax administration purposes. So in this regard, let's move to our next panelist, Mr. Tariq Naseem from the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan. And actually, one of the questions would be with regard to the data. So how is the integration of SCCP's database with other stakeholders facilitating formalization of SMEs, if it is? And how will this integration be used for effective data mining and creating a more realistic tax base? And I have another set of questions also for you. In a bid for formalizations, when a small and medium enterprise chooses to operate as a company or LLP, in your view, what are the key taxation issues and challenges, and what can be done to address those issues and challenges? Similarly, when a private equity or venture fund works as or aims to work as an SME, what are the taxation issues for them? Over to you, Mr. Naseem.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. To your first question regarding data integration with the other stakeholders, I think most of us know that the corporate registry setup that we maintain and the secure transaction registry setup is already linked with a number of organizations at national and provincial level. That includes the Federal Board of Revenue, Excise and Taxation Department of the provinces, Labor Departments, EOBIs, etc. So in these linkages, primarily the registration part of integration is covered. But when it comes to the taxation part, I think we need financial data of the regulators or companies or LLPs. And for that, I think a lot need to be done, particularly the financial reporting of entities that we regulate, the companies incorporated in Pakistan and LLPs, have to report data in a format that can be accessed by everyone in this integrated setup. Unfortunately, in the today's reporting mechanism, that part is not covered adequately, and most of the time, the data reported by companies, if they meet some threshold specified in the company law, is not in a state that can be shared or used for data mining for the purposes of other integration or the purposes of uses of other organization at the same time. Coming to your second part of your question, when we wanted business to be documented, we encouraged them to form a company, and at that stage, there are this transition from a in unincorporated business, sole proprietor or AOP to a company is not smooth because of many issues, and one of the issue could be a change in the tax obligation from an individual business owner to a corporate because of multiple regulatory requirement and the rate of tax that a company is obliged to pay. For example, we often hear this that income of a company is subject to tax at two levels, at the entity level and that at the time of distribution of profit to the shareholder in form of tax on dividend. So this total tax for a normal company translate into a range of about 40% as compared to an AOP that is subject to tax at the rate of 5% to 35% in a staggering approach. So this transition is difficult to digest for an entity intending to convert its business in a company form that is more documented and more transparent. Secondly, when a company is incorporated and start filing regulatory requirements and tax requirements, then there is a fear that the period before the incorporation is also subject to questions by the regulatory authorities, but particularly FPR. And that is another area where people or businesses not choose to be incorporated in Pakistan. And the third and most important issue, in my view, is the capacity issues. Even after the formation of the company, their ability to understand and comply with the regulatory requirements, taxation matters, maintaining proper books of accounts, conducting and using audits, in addition to primarily focusing on their business operations, is not conducive, not easy for them. So the capacity side need to be worked on by all the stakeholders in the value in the chain and the institutions that deal with the businesses as a regulator, as a facilitator, or industry associations. On the last part of your question regarding pass-through status of the private equity and venture capital fund, when somebody invests in a company directly without forming a private equity and venture fund, its taxation is simple, but at the moment it create a collective investment vehicle, pool the resources, and then invest into a company. Then multiple layers of taxations kick in, and that make that whole process illogical or unaffordable. So most of the time, our tax law has this pass-through status for private equity and venture fund. At the entity level, there's no tax, but at the same time, there are fears in the industry that this pass-through status can be revoked at any point in time, whereas private equity and venture capitals are looking for investments beyond 5 years, 7 years, and 10 years tenure. So they need some kind of assurances or some kind of sustainable tax policy in this regard, so that they can able to not only fund the SMEs, but handhold them to improve their capacity to not only in operations, but also regulatory compliance, including taxation compliance. Another element that I would like to mention is the treatment of return on debt instrument versus return on equity. Our taxation law, and that is the case with most of the jurisdiction, is that the return on debt instrument is subject to is a deductible expense, whereas a return on equity is not. So this clearly favors the company and corporations to raise funds through debt instruments because it is a tax deductible expense, and it can provide an upfront benefit of at least 29%. So the bottom line of all these issues that I have mentioned is that we need to have a tax policy where the tax obligation of a business should not change due to mere change of its structure, its form, or its status of business entity in Pakistan. Similarly, the obligations of the investor should not change if they choose to directly invest in some venture, or they wanted to pool their investment and then subsequently invest in a venture. And above all, for promotion of Islamic finance as per the mandate of the Constitution of Pakistan and in light of the recent judgment of Federal Shariat Court, I think we need to work out to neutralize the tax regime for the corporations, that in a way that if they raise funding through debt instrument or they raise funding through the equity instruments, their tax treatment should be the similar, at least, if not failing the equity. So these are a few few submissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Naseem Saab. So I think as we move toward the conclusion, we are almost soon will be out of time also. So may I request Ms. Daraksha Vora, if she's still with us. And then my question to you would be, what are some of the pressing challenges pertaining to taxation as well as registration, formalization of the SMEs, especially startups in Pakistan? So now your legal perspective, Ms. Vora, over to you.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much. So I work mostly, I'm not a caveat here that I'm not really specifically a taxation expert, but I worked extensively with SMEs and obviously in the startup space a lot. So the most challenging experience is that obviously, like I've ad nauseum, everybody has spoken about it, that obviously the regime is extremely complicated. So for new businesses coming into the picture, often entrepreneurs do not have any experience in formally running businesses unless they're repeat founders or more senior professionals who are starting a business. So in addition to trying to set up the business, raise money, understand the legal ramifications, financial structuring, financial modeling, we also have an incredibly complicated taxation structure, which for most professionals who actually run businesses, large corporates as well, it's also extremely complicated. So it's not only complicated and difficult to understand, most importantly, when we've talked about, there being a federal regime and also a provincial multiple regime. So for example, if you have a business based out of Sindh, but you're also providing services in Punjab, then you also need registration with the PRA often for those services that you are providing in Punjab. So this becomes extremely complicated for new businesses to understand the likelihood of, and there are two serious ramifications for that. One is the fact that obviously it's for a new business or a small business incurring costs in understanding how to deal with those complexities. It's not a cost-effective activity for them to indulge in. The other thing is that when they're raising funds, the requirement is obviously that they should be tax registered. So when you go to practitioners, they often tell you that, Achha, you're a small business, you should remain an AOP or you should remain a sole proprietorship. But then when you go on to the fundraise side to expanding your business, then obviously you're required to be set up as a private limited company and also be tax compliant. So, it becomes a chicken and egg situation for small businesses to they would obviously want to be both regulatory wise and tax compliant, but there's a huge cost in terms of time, effort, and money which is involved. So that's my perspective on particularly on the startup front and SMEs.
Thank you so much, Ms. Vora. I think that's very useful. And this brings us toward the conclusion of this session. And I must thank all of you for this a very wonderful and very rich discussion. I think the report itself has triggered this discussion on a very important topic, as it lays out that the growth in the SME sector, of course, is very important for Pakistan's economy, and taxation being one key issue in that, it has to be addressed. I think a number of things have come up, And I'm sure these would be taken forward by the organizers and contribute to government's policy and other programmatic measures. I would, in the end, commend Karandaaz for undertaking this initiative and doing this research and bringing these issues to light, and for organizing this session. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you everybody for joining us, for taking out this time, and apologies for the slight delay and sticking around for this insightful discussion. And with that, I would now request Dr. Najib Memon to join us. He will be addressing with his closing remarks. And for those who don't know, Dr. Najib Memon is currently serving as Chief Commissioner, Karachi Inland Revenue Service for FPR. He is a unique tax policy professional with qualifications in tax, accounting and law, with over 10 years of experience in tax administration and tax research. So Dr. Najib, I would really like for you to start off and end us on a high note, I hope. जी आपकी आवाज थोड़ी सी जो है ना वो म्यूट कम आ रही है, अगर आप थोड़ा ऊंची बात कर लें या माइक के पास हो जाएं.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you're audible. Please continue.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to conclude the session. Basically, to me, taxation is Albert Einstein said, the most difficult thing to understand in life. But anyway, we have to make some choices when we talk about taxation in the country. The first and foremost choice is about the structure of the taxation in Pakistan, which primarily consists of income tax and VAT, but we have to make choice who should pay which tax, and then similar things. Then another important choice is about the assignment of taxes to the different tiers of government. These all factors are going to affect the cost of compliance of the SMEs. Then the aims and objectives which policymakers intend to achieve through a tax system in the country. Adam Smith had rightly said in its Wealth of Nations that we should collect revenue for the state, we should use taxation for the redistribution of income, and we should also use taxes for the economic growth. Now, which of these aims are relevant to a developing country? These are the questions which will be decided by the policymakers, and they are going to influence the cost of compliance of the SMEs. We primarily have two taxes in the country, income tax and sales tax. And for both these two taxes to be successfully implemented in the country, there should be some prerequisites, like the level of literacy in the country, like the effective tax administration, the level of documentation in the country, and the presence of the modern and well-developed accounting profession. If those preconditions are not present, it will be very hard to administer these taxes successfully in the country. And for income tax, unlike sales tax, although they are similar, that both have a high cost of compliance, the income tax has one more peculiarity to it, that its economic base, which is subject to tax, is income. And income is ascertained through a proper maintenance of books of accounts. And determination of income is one of the hardest tasks to make. And that makes the cost of compliance higher for the SMEs also, because maintenance of books of accounts is quite an expensive exercise. And if in our country, where the per capita income is very low, around $1,100, and with the $1,100, you see very few people fall into the taxable limits. In the true, if I say about 1 million in a year, very few persons fall into that category. And if you ask them to maintain books of accounts in order to ascertain their level of income, that proportionately is a very high cost of compliance. So this is peculiar with income tax. Another important thing which is peculiar about income tax is that many people have a tendency to lie about the income. We all are familiar about this common proverb that never ask a woman her age and never ask a man his wage. Everybody has a tendency to lie about the income. One comedian once said in early 20th century that the income taxation has produced more liars than the game of a golf. So when this is peculiar about income tax, then collecting income tax from SMEs is hard for the tax administrators also. And for the SMEs, it's hard because maintenance of the books of accounts is an expensive exercise. Here we need to have some solution from the policymakers that whether we can adjust the income tax design in such a manner that it becomes much cheaper for the SMEs to comply. Now, discussing the SMEs in the context of informal economy is also important. Informal economy is not only present in developing countries. In many developed countries also, such as South Korea, Russia, they've got a quite big size of informal economy. And informal economy these days is further growing because the services component in the overall GDPs of most countries is growing. In Pakistan, currently, the services sector consists of around 56 to 57% of the overall GDP. And most of the operators in the services sector are SMEs. And the services sector and SMEs mostly operate in the informal economy. So informal economy becomes synonymous with the SMEs. So if somebody can successfully tackle informal economy, then it means you can tackle SMEs also. So what are the causes of informal economy where these SMEs are operating? As most of these speakers already have said, it's the high compliance cost. And as I said, the most of the high compliance cost is emanating from where? It's emanating from its true nature. The nature is the economic base which we tax in income taxation, and that's the income. So determination of income through bookkeeping enhances the compliance cost. And besides that, the technical compliance cost is the tax burden which it unleashes in terms of the tax rate. The tax rate is quite high in Pakistan, in both income tax as well as in the sales tax, which has recently been further enhanced to 18%. And in income tax, it's around 35%. With this high technical compliance cost, as well as the administrative compliance cost in terms of determining income through bookkeeping, we can say that the informal sector in Pakistan and in most developing countries is basically is promoted because of this factor, high compliance cost. The single most important factor which is responsible for the large SME sector or informal sector in Pakistan. Second, of course, is the ineffective tax administration. If we don't have efficient tax administration, if we don't have sufficient resources with the tax administration, and if we have integrity issues in the tax administration, the informal sector is large. We need to address these issues if we want to take this potential of tax in the informal sector. The third important factor, of course, is the tax morale. And tax morale is the intrinsic motivation for paying taxes. In this country, the tax morale is low because of the one major factor, and that is the perception about the tax system in the country. Most of the Pakistanis here consider that our tax system is unfair. Why this is unfair? Because within the tax regime, if I refer to the income taxation, we have provided several exemptions in the second schedule, number one. And number two, some classes of income have been given a very concessionary tax treatment. If I talk about agriculture income, if I talk about the capital gains tax on the sale of immovable properties, on the sale of shares, these all heads are subjected, the classes of income are subjected at a very concessionary tax regime. And even other than that, if we see besides exemption about the agriculture income and about the taxable income, if we see we have been offering amnesty, which also create an impression that the tax administration is ineffective and they are not serious in collecting taxes. So this perception of unfairness is also driven by another important factor, that's the poor governance in the country. So the literature has a lot of evidence with it that all those countries where there's a poor governance, the tax morale is low. So when in an informal economy, we find that there's high compliance costs, there's ineffective tax administration, and when there's a low tax morale, it's very hard to collect optimal tax. Another important factor which causes a large informal economy is the cost benefit analysis if we make for a business. If a country has a high tax rate and high compliance costs in terms of administrative costs, the taxpayer, even the SME, will see that the benefit of not complying is higher than the benefit of paying taxes. So whenever a SME is going to make an analysis of cost and the benefit, the higher cost will tilt his decision in the favor of not complying. So all these factors collectively are responsible for the informal economy. And informal economy, as we all have been discussing since morning, comprises primarily of the SME sector. So unless we address these causes of informal economy, we will not be able to attract the SMEs towards the registration with the tax authorities. And this informal economy has disastrous consequences. It not only causes loss of revenue, but it further enhances this, increases this feeling of unfairness in the society, because the operators of the informal economy escape taxation. So when they escape taxation, those who are paying formal taxes in the formal sector, they feel aggrieved that why they are paying taxes, and this perception of unfairness gets aggravated. This informal economy also slows down the economy because the formal sectors become uncompetitive. The resources are shifting from the formal to the informal sector, and the formal sector is the only sector which pays taxes. It's the same cow which we are milking in the barn again and again. There is the informal sector remains outside the tax regime. Interestingly, the informal economy, even the SMEs who are operating informally are not in an advantageous position. They also suffer from dwarfism. Why they suffer from dwarfism? Because they cannot sell to 20-30% of the customers because they are operating informally. They do not have an access to the credit which Karandaaz is offering because they are flying under the radar. And they also bear costs of penalties and indirect taxes. So you see the informal sector, when informal economy thrives, it is putting everyone at a disadvantageous position, the formal sector as well as the informal sector. It causes loss of revenue and it causes the perception of unfairness, which dampens the tax morale. So this is a self-propelling cycle which will not end unless we are going to disrupt it through some relevant policy measures. Now, one of the finding and one of the questions which was addressing this group in its research was whether it's the government which is blaming the SMEs that it's paying tax, it's not paying tax, or it's the SME which is complaining that there is a higher compliance cost which is discouraging them. I would say that as we discussed about the consequences of the informal sector, we mentioned that the small sector is also, the SME is also in a disadvantageous position. The reason is that it suffers from the dwarfism. It also intends to become large and reap the benefits of economies of scale, which their competitors in the formal sector are reaping. So how to motivate them? How to encourage them to do this? can we do only if we address the causes of the informal economy. So instead of blaming them and considering them as the hard to tax taxpayers, and instead of relying entirely on applying full force of law against them, we need to help them, because these informal operators, these SMEs, are also suffering from dwarfism. And how we can address them? Perhaps if we lay the X on the root causes, like one of the major causes of informal economy is the illiteracy. So we should educate them. Another important cause of the informal economy and the reason for operating an informal economy is the high compliance cost. We should reduce the cost. And if we can, and here in Pakistan, it's not simply providing them the easy solutions for return filing, but we have to even address the very design of the income tax and sales tax through which they are paying taxes. Because this design of income tax, which is based on income as an economic base, which is subject to tax, is making it cumbersome. So we have to think, especially for micro and small businesses, we should think of finding an alternative in the design of the income tax, which can reduce this compliance cost. Because if a person who's making income of, for example, 1 million rupees in a year cannot afford to pay 100,000 rupees to the accountant to maintain books of accounts, this makes 10% of the total income of that person. And then particularly in the wake of the very poor intrinsic motivation, low tax morale, because when they are seeing that money is not being properly utilized in giving them the amenities which they deserve in the society, and the state is not spending money on them. So this allegation that they are hard to taxpayers is not a valid allegation. In fact, they should be assisted in terms of reducing the compliance cost, in terms of helping the small entrepreneurs to get education. Education not only about the business processes and entrepreneurship, but also of accounting and complying with the tax law. The higher the education, the higher will be the compliance levels. Now, I would also like to conclude about the performance of the Pakistani tax system. It is not amazing. The reason is obvious, as I said, that most of the operators, the business entrepreneurs in this country have a very low levels of income. One study said that more than 80% of the operators, the business entrepreneurs here have a turnover of less than 500,000 rupees. And even if they have a turnover of 5 million rupees and the tax and the net profit rate is 10%, the income levels they can have would be around 500,000 rupees. And with that level of turnover and income, if we commensurate it with the cost of compliance, the cost is too high. So perhaps in this country, there's not that much potential which we are expecting. We are trying to increase the tax to GDP ratio, but a country where the per capita income level is too low, is $1,100, almost half of that of the Bangladesh. And with that low level, if we apply the full force of law to collect revenue, we will not succeed, because that is only going to milk the same cow which we are milking already. And as we said, that when 26% of the agriculture in GDP and when 56% of services sector is out of the tax roll, when we apply the full force of the law, it's only going to increase the effective tax rate on the rest of the operators in the economy. So 30% of the GDP is going to bear this brunt of the tax administration. So instead of applying the full force of law, we need to address the root causes of informal economy. We have to take away this blame from the SMEs that they are the hard to tax taxpayers and they are delinquent taxpayers. In fact, they are also the sufferers. They are also at the disadvantageous position because they have become dwarfed. And we need to help them by providing them education, by reducing their compliance costs, and also giving them access to the low cost financing. In the end, what could be the solution? The part of the solution I have already submitted, that we should address the root causes of informal economy. This is not sufficient in saying that we have simplified the law. Simplification of laws will not address this problem, especially for micro and small businesses, unless we perhaps should look for a proxy of income in order to tax these SMEs in respect of income taxation. So we must address the tax design issue with respect to the SMEs. And secondly, we must not use the withholding tax regime is only is a tool to bring everybody to a tax net, because it seems that now withholding tax regime has become so extensive that right from the cradle to the grave, every activity in life has become taxable. And withholding tax regime is basically a kind of a delegating this responsibility of collecting taxes to the businesses, which not only is being misused, but is also putting a lot of burden on the businesses. Especially, I think it's a time to refer to these different thresholds in the tax system for becoming a withholding agent. 50 million rupees for the AOPs and individuals, and every corporate entity, as it was rightly said by Tariq Naseem, that when anybody becomes a corporate entity, even irrespective of the turnover, that becomes a withholding agent, which is going to put the burden on the taxpayer to comply. Similarly, even the threshold for the VAT regime, 5 million rupees since several decades. Now, if we see the depreciation of rupee, this 5 million rupees hardly will be few $1,000. And with this, I think the VAT regime becomes mandatory for every SME, and that's going to put a lot of cost also. So what I'm trying to point out here is that we need to review these thresholds for the below taxable limit, BTL limits. We have to review them for the withholding tax regime eligibility, and we have to review them for the VAT regime eligibility also. And we should not simply here again, I would emphasize the same point, that if the developed countries are collecting taxes, income taxes, especially on the basis of income, it's not necessary we should follow suit. The reason is that one size does not fit all, and our tax administration perhaps also does not have a capacity to determine the income of every individual on the basis of income. These 700-800 tax assessing officers across Pakistan cannot determine the income of 200 million people in this country. And even if we talk about 5.2 million business entrepreneurs, these 700 people cannot exactly determine the income of these entrepreneurs. So this is not possible. So we should look for a design. And here is the time also to refer to a common anecdote, which is said that the tax administration is a tax policy, and the tax policy is a tax administration. We cannot make a policy which cannot be executed by a weak tax administration. We have to keep in mind the capacity of tax administration when we are designing a tax policy. Unless we enhance the tax policy, enhance the capacity of tax administration, we cannot force them to collect the income taxes on basis of the income, because they cannot do that. And so in the first phase, we should use the proxy of income for taxing these SMEs for income tax purposes. And then slowly and gradually, we should transit to the proper income tax, regular income tax regime. So this transition and this slow and gradual change should be adopted. And then in order to improve perception of fairness, the government should stop offering amnesty. Government should make sure that whatever is collected is properly spent on the taxpayers, or on the taxpayers and on the society. And we should also make sure that the that the disparity in terms of the availability of tax planning facility, which can be stated in terms of economy of scale, is equally available to the small and the large businesses. Unless we do not remove these inequities, and we should also make sure that all classes of income are subjected to the neutral tax regime instead of a discriminate tax regime. And when these indicators of unfairness are present, it's very hard to encourage the SMEs to get enrolled, get registered, and pay taxes. Last but not least, the tax administration should be made efficient, should be made resourceful. And when it comes to the element of corruption or integrity issues in the taxation, I believe that we have to look towards the judicial system. The integrity can only be addressed by the effective judicial system in the country. So we cannot treat these problems in silos, in isolation. We have to address the issue of tax perception. We have to address the issue of this unfairness. We have to address the issue of literacy. We have to address the issue of the tax design. And we have to address the root causes of informal economy in order to attract the SMEs from the informal to the formal sector. We must stop calling them the delinquent taxpayers, the hard to tax taxpayers. They are themselves now have become dwarfed because of this situation, and they need to be facilitated. They need to be supported in order to take them out of this dwarfism and operate as a regular business. With this, I end my concluding remarks, and I thank you very much for giving me this patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maiman, for your wonderful comments. And on that note, I would like to thank everybody for joining us and staying with us throughout this session. It was really wonderful to hear from all of you. And I know a lot of the comments I've mentioned. Yes, the recording will be available on our Facebook page. This was being recorded, and the report will be published on our website very shortly in the coming days. And as for the presentation, we will see if we will upload on the website or not, but the report will definitely be there. And have a wonderful day until the next time. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.